Hello, good morning, and welcome back. We're ready to start, so please take your seats. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for being here with us on the second day of the Summit on Media and Democracy. Thank you for joining us today for this early morning session. My name is Nicholas Aronis. I am a journalist and project manager, member of the iMEdD team, and I am especially happy to present this session about the pivotal topic to the health communities and the strength of our democracy: the collaboration between media and civil society. In this interconnected age, the synergy between these two pillars of democracy is not just beneficial, it is essential for the health and progress of our societies. Media, often called the fourth estate, play a crucial role in shaping public opinion, disseminating information, and holding power to account. It is the lens through which the world views events, forms opinions, and takes action. In an era where misinformation can spread like wildfire, the media's role in providing accurate, timely, and unbiased information has never been more critical. Civil society encompasses various organizations and movements, from non-governmental organizations and community groups to advocacy organizations and grassroots movements. These entities are the heartbeat of societal progress, championing causes and giving voice to the marginalized. Civil society works tirelessly to promote social justice, human rights, and sustainable development. In today's rapidly changing media landscape, the collaboration between media and civil society is a powerful alliance that can drive significant social change. This partnership not only enriches the quality of journalism, but also enhances community engagement, strengthens democratic processes, amplifies diverse voices, broadens perspectives, and fosters an informed and engaged citizenry and social cohesion. By working together, the media and the communities can address critical issues more effectively and promote transparency and accountability. While such a collaboration holds a great promise, it is not without challenges. Issues such as censorship, risks of bias and loss of objectivity, the risk of unbalanced reporting, agenda setting and manipulation, political interference, and financial constraints can hinder this partnership. Nevertheless, such a collaboration is of paramount importance. As the media landscape evolves, these partnerships will become increasingly crucial in building informed, engaged, and resilient communities. Despite potential drawbacks, maintaining a clear focus on journalistic principles and ethical standards, embracing new technologies, fostering media literacy, and building networks of trust and collaboration allow media to navigate these challenges effectively, ensuring their partnerships serve the public interest. By working together, media and civil society can contribute to a more just, democratic, and cohesive society. But I don't want to keep you any longer. I think it's time for me to stop talking and give the floor to our four esteemed guests. Alison Levine, founder and CEO of the Local Journalism Initiative, is an accomplished journalist from Delaware, known for her insightful community reporting. Alison. Nick Dawes. Nick Dawes is the Executive Director of The City, a non-profit news organization in New York. Morgan Malone, a dedicated to public interest investigative journalist. And Martin Carcassonne, a communication studies professor and founder of the Center for Public Deliberation at Colorado State University, specializes in deliberative democracy and collaborative decision-making. A leading voice, Martin, in fostering informed and inclusive civic participation. Thank you all for being here with us today. And I will start with you, Alison, since you are playing at your home court. I want you to tell us what motivated you to start the local journalism initiative at the Delaware Spotlight, and how and what you do. I think it's open.
Okay, great. That's how I can't turn it on because it's already turned on. So, hi, yeah, I'm Allison. I'm happy to be here with all of you representing our beautiful city, as a couple of folks have called out. Wilmington is a great place to be, and there are a couple of things that I've always been passionate about through my whole life. I'm really most passionate about our democracy, our community, and journalism, frankly. And what I have observed over the past 15 to 20 years in Delaware and around the country and around the world really has been a little bit heartbreaking to see what has happened as the economy has changed with the rise of the internet. And I wanted to do something about it, because obviously the models that we have right now are not working that great. I don't know that I have the answer or that there is an answer, but that's what made me want to start trying. We have to try some different models to build up our local news ecosystem and to shift the way that it serves people in Delaware and around the world. The media, it's no secret, the local media, I should say, is in a bit of disarray. And the situation that it's in now, even when it was good, it wasn't really serving all audiences well. So how can we sort of try to reshape it and look at some different possibilities? So that's what motivated me a couple of years ago to start the Local Journalism Initiative, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization in Delaware. And we are working to strengthen democracy and community by strengthening local journalism. In 2022, we conducted a statewide ecosystem assessment, an assessment of our local news and information ecosystem, to try to get our arms around what's happening in Delaware, what's working for people, what's not working for people, what do people want and need, how can we do better? And that ecosystem assessment that was published in 2022 now informs all of the work that we are doing, and we continue to build on that research. The ecosystem assessment is informing our 3 current work streams. We have 3 major initiatives going on right now. One is an internship program that we originally formed in partnership with the Delaware Community Foundation. And that internship program works with local newsrooms to try to deepen the pipeline of Black and brown local news reporters and local news reporters from other underserved and underrepresented communities. We also run something called the Delaware Journalism Collaborative, which is a convening of 23 Delaware newsrooms, the state libraries, other community organizations. And that convening, that collaborative, is working on deep diving and leading, deep dive reporting and leading conversations about polarization in our communities and the issues that drive wedges between us and how we can work together more effectively. That collaborative spent the first 2 years really working on polarization, and this year, because of how polarizing elections can be, is focusing on voter education and information, to try to engage and inspire and inform more Delawareans to vote and participate in the local elections. Our most ambitious project launched just this year, and that's called Spotlight Delaware. Spotlight Delaware is a first of its kind, collaborative, community-powered nonprofit newsroom. And I want to shout out, I see some of my team here. I see Jake Owens, our editor-in-chief, David Stradley, our director of membership and community engagement. Thank you guys for being here. We have a couple of other team members. I don't think they're here. No? Okay, great. I want to make sure I don't miss folks. This is Delaware after all. You have to make sure you include everybody. Spotlight Delaware just launched a couple of months ago, and we're a fast-growing newsroom. We are focused on the impact of public policy decisions and how they affect people's everyday lives. And we're particularly paying close attention to underserved and underrepresented communities that haven't always been included or served by local media well. We are seeking to inspire people to get involved in government, in elections, in voting, and in other ways. Civic engagement doesn't just have to mean voting, right? There are lots of ways, as we've heard over the last couple of days, to participate in our civil society. And that's particularly important when we're talking about folks who are not citizens, right? If you can't vote, that doesn't mean you can't participate. We still want people to participate. So we are working to inspire people to participate and then to equip them with the information they need to effectively drive the change that they want to see. And we're doing this through 4 key strategies. First, we are co-creating Spotlight Delaware with our communities. Right now, we are in the midst of a 12-session statewide community listening tour where we are talking with hundreds of Delawareans. We have already engaged about 400 people throughout the state, and we have several more sessions to go, where we're really trying to understand what people want and need and how we can best serve them, because we want to build this newsroom with and for our communities. Second strategy is that we're actually working to build up the whole local news ecosystem in Delaware. It's not enough to create a new nonprofit newsroom and say that that fixes the problem, right? We have gaps in our ecosystem. We have people who need access to local news and information, and you'll hear me say repeatedly local news and information, because it's not just news, right? People also need basic information. They need to know how to register their kids for kindergarten. They need to know when jobs are available. They need to know how to sign up for a small business loan. This is not necessarily news, but it is information that we need as communities. Our third strategy, we're working to meet people where they are. It's really hard to get people to change their media diets. I have no belief that we're going to get every Delawarean to come visit spotlightdelaware.org. We're trying to go where people already are. So that's why we're doing this through a series of partnerships with existing news organizations. So we're building partnerships with legacy media organizations throughout the state. We already have 5 local newspapers, legacy newspapers, and online news organizations signed on that actually republish our content. So those audiences are also getting the information that we're providing. And that also helps to strengthen those existing newsrooms by giving them more product against which they can sell advertising, sell subscriptions, sell sponsorships, et cetera. And then our fourth strategy, going where people are, I should say, we're also building a network of non-traditional information sources. When we go out into the community, not everybody reads a newspaper, listens to a news show, watches news on TV, or otherwise actually seeks out news in a traditional way. What people do, though, is they're on WhatsApp, or they read their church newsletter, or they see flyers on the bulletin board at the Y. So we're working to find out who the information sources are, who are those trusted ambassadors in the community, and we're partnering with them to get information out to communities in different ways. And finally, in this strategy, we're also working toward providing information in different languages, because if we truly want to include more communities in a meaningful way, we need to go to them where they are in the languages that they speak most comfortably. Is that we're working to build agency in people. When we are writing stories about public policy, you know, a bunch of us in this room are policy and journalism nerds, right? We get excited about this stuff. Most people don't. So we are working, when we write almost every story, we have a box at the top that says, why should you care about this? Why should Delawareans care about this story, about what's happening at the Port of Wilmington? And why should you read this 1,500-word wonky story? Let us tell you at the top. Somewhere in that story, we're also going to tell you, what can you do about it? We've had a story this week about a law that's being considered that would require both the University of Delaware and Delaware State University to provide access to abortion pills through student health care. We're not saying what you should think about that. We're providing the information, and there's a button in the middle of the story that tells you how to contact the legislator who's driving that issue. So that's how we're working to build agency. So that is where we are right now.
I don't know about you, but to me it sounds that you've done a lot in a very short period of time.
Thanks. I have a great team behind me.
Nick, the city is a medium that is continuously in discussion with the communities. Could you share with us some information on how you managed to do that? And if you want to refer to a project that was completed with the communities and the impact it had.
Sure. You know, maybe I'll pull back for a quick second first before I start talking about a concrete example, because I think everyone, certainly the three of us who are working in some of these newer news organizations, we kind of represent part of an emerging movement. And you're going to hear a lot of common themes between us about the way we approach things. I know not everyone in the room or online is a journalism person, so I just want to situate some context quickly before I talk about why, in New York City of all places, we need to have a nonprofit news organization that centers community in its investigative journalism and in its service journalism. Journalism people invented the future of news about 20 years ago. So we've had about 20 years of the future. And a lot of the future of news conversation was a response to the technology shock of the 90s and the early 2000s. The technology shock, the audience shock, the trust shock, and most importantly, the revenue shock, right? And the way that we've dealt with that is to kind of adopt a lot of the thinking and the processes and even maybe the ideologies of technology. Come up with an innovative solution, be a heroic innovator, test stuff, deploy it, iterate. And there have been some amazing results from that, you know, really rich storytelling formats that we never used to have before that jump off the page. Revenue models, hard paywall, membership, you know, ad supported. There have even been innovations in the way we think about our ethics and our trust model, being more transparent about where we're coming from, having a frame of fairness maybe rather than balance. So that whole discussion has been going on really for 2 decades at least, and it's produced a media landscape that really is still deeply, deeply broken. And part of that, I think, is because the future of news conversation, for all of you who've never heard of it, right, was a conversation that journalists had among themselves about their profession and about themselves, and really centered us. And so what do we have? We have like a very successful New York Times that can charge $50 a month or whatever it is for very rich reporting and Wordle. We have some, you know, digital startups that shot up like rockets, HuffPost, BuzzFeed, and then sort of died. 1 or 2 that have sustained, like Vox Media, and that remain really important voices. But meanwhile, 2,500 local news outlets have shuttered. And if you look at the most optimistic assessments, or even, of the broad news landscape, and you count where is a news desert, a place, a county with no outlet, and where are there places where there are outlets, and what is the relationship of communities to their news providers and to their local politicians, you get an overly optimistic assessment, because a lot of what remains is crime and pink slime in newspapers that are owned by hedge funds, in local TV outlets that can really only afford to chase the police blotter. And what the people on this stage represent, I think, is an effort to bring some different tools to bear. And I want to get from that to what we do at the city. And so some of the tools that we end up using are from community organizing, from ethnography, listening, and from the Black and community press, which has always had a different approach to these issues than what the mainstream press has had. And so we have an opportunity now to think about our place in the civic conversation in a way that's not about, the heroic journalist as an innovator standing alone and fixing the problem, but a more collaborative, engaged, humble approach to the work that we do. And so, many of our organizations have been created in the way that Alison described in so much detail, by starting out with asking people what they need, what they want, how they feel about us. Oftentimes, how they feel is not that great. It's kind of rough. And oftentimes what they tell us is that we've done damage. And, it's very easy to actually see the damage. I would encourage everyone to do an experiment, is go into your Google search dialog and start typing in the name of a lower income community of color neighborhood in your city. And I promise you what you'll see happening is you'll get these auto prompts coming back from Google that are going to say, so for example, near to me, Brownsville, New York. If you start typing in Brownsville into the Google search bar, what will come back to you is, it gives you the little suggestions to make your search more efficient. It'll come back to you and say, is Brownsville sketchy? How dangerous is Brownsville? What's the crime rate in Brownsville? And all of those prompts are built on the training data that's been provided by local news organizations, that's been provided by our coverage of those communities over decades and decades. Huge libraries of kind of discrimination, essentially. So when we think about what the news needs to look like in a way that actually fosters and drives civic connection, supports rich civic engagement, supports democracy, and that is designed to support democracy, thinking about it in the ways that Alison has outlined and that we're going to hear more about from Morgan from the very beginning, requires us to incorporate that insight. So there's the stage of organization design, right? And certainly when the city launched in New York, relatively early in the burgeoning of this new movement, just 5 years ago, we looked around and a lot of people would have said, well, this is the media capital of the world. Certainly not a news desert, right? The New York Times has got a skyscraper on 38th Street. And the broadcast networks have, shiny towers on 6th Avenue. You're not needed. But what we are is not a news desert. We're kind of a news swamp with a really, really compromised ecosystem where coverage of local neighborhoods, really broken local electoral systems, hugely busted housing courts, political machines that are incredibly unresponsive and unaccountable, immense inequality has withered away. And even when it was there, what we heard from people was it did damage. And what is left is media that serves very well the very large number of enormously wealthy people in New York who are mostly concentrated in Manhattan below about 96th Street or 110th Street and Brownstone, Brooklyn, and ignores the rest of the city except to the extent that it illustrates something bad. And we believe that it's crucial to address that both for the civic health of the biggest city in the country and actually for the national conversation, because so many of the most damaging representations of what's happening in our big cities and in public policy generally focus on big cities and big city policy and the representation of who lives in big cities and what affects their lives. So I'm sorry for the long preamble, but I think it's important to put together this kind of civic context and the journalism conversation in a way that shows that we have to be more fundamentally responsive to both what people are asking us at the neighborhood level and what people are doing from a news perspective. So we tried to build the city that way and to build in community input in the design of the organization first, and then into the journalism choices that we make as we go along. And we do that at varying levels of complexity. The simplest thing we do is to hold meetings, usually at a public library branch, which are off-the-record community conversations. And we just ask people what they're thinking about and what's troubling them, what they need information about. And we hear some pretty consistent stuff there. The rent is too damn high. We can't figure out how to access assistance. What's a journalistic response to that? Building housing into a coverage area that is not real estate is one response to that. Creating service and explanatory journalism that makes sense of how to access it is another. But we also do specific projects that grow out of that kind of interaction. And if you want a clear impact, the most complex project we did, and I hate to harken back to COVID, but the most complex community project we did began during COVID, where we saw that obituaries were available mainly to people with money who could afford to place one in the Times, and pretty much everyone whose death was being represented was white and affluent, and most of the people who were dying were not white or affluent. So we created a project to give everyone an obituary and to collaborate with the community to write them, roped in journalism volunteers, journalism educators to build a memorial to everyone lost to COVID-19. And we worked with local theater groups to translate that into a play. But over time, and this is bringing it back to the present, that project created its own community and led to much deeper trust than you would expect among families who had been affected by COVID and who are still affected by COVID, which we're all trying so hard to pretend is over. And what we consistently heard in those conversations was that there were thousands and thousands of children who had been left without a caregiver. In fact, in New York City alone, 8,500 kids were left without a caregiver. So we worked with community groups working with those kids, listened to those kids, tried to understand what was happening with their needs, and essentially that family members were having to take them in, support them financially, and that ongoing burden persists to this day. And the result of actually publishing that number and identifying some of those issues was the creation of legislation to create special COVID bonds to provide financial support from the New York State Legislature to those families. It hasn't passed yet, but a very clear case of community input into what we should be covering, an issue that from a kind of traditional chasing clicks perspective wasn't going to garner much action, and is actually the result of the long tail of 3 years of coverage and 3 years of communication with those communities to produce a legislative outcome. There are lots of others, some of them, we can talk about them as we go.
But this one definitely created a bond between the medium and the community, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Morgan, why and how does the City Bureau equip people with skills and resources? And does this engagement in critical public conversation produce information that directly addresses people's needs?
Good morning, y'all. Good morning, good morning. Hi, everybody, I'm Morgan, as mentioned. I am the Executive Director of City Bureau. A little bit more context about City Bureau. We are a civic media lab, and we do things a little different. We're a little alternative, you know. For a long time, people would ask us, are you a newsroom? And the answer is we're a sustained impact newsroom. Our coverage doesn't look like everyone else's. We don't have a daily outlet. What we do have is guides. We give people the information they need, informed by what people ask us for and how we engage with community and what they tell us is important. So what we find that people need in the context of coverage and why our products are so interesting to them is that they need a how-to. How do I navigate systems? And it's not just the coverage. It's how do we wrap experience around coverage? So City Bureau operates in 3 program verticals. One program vertical is our Documenters program. Our Documenters program is when we pay everyday citizens to go to public meetings. We pay them to document what they hear, we train them, and then those notes are then transferred and translated into distribution through coverage, through our fellowships, through our partnerships. Sometimes we do special assignments with documenters that are not just taking notes, but are surveying or interviewing. We equip people with the skills of journalism so that they can move towards self-determination and self-advocacy. And so as we give people the skills of journalism, we train them, and then they're able to be a part of our editorial process in the context of our public newsroom forum, where we do civic education. So for public newsroom, journalists, everyday citizens, community organizations all come together, talk about issues, inform stories, do repeat backs, deconstruct topics. And that particular program has been adopted all over the world. We have groups as far as Brazil doing public newsrooms. And for our Documenters work, you all may have heard of the Documenters Network. And I too have team members here. So Max is in the back if you guys want to start a Documenter site. And Max runs our growth and innovation work for the Documenters Network. And so we are currently in 17 other communities outside of Chicago, wherever we have over 6,500 assignments that have been taken all over the country. We have nearly 700 legislative bodies all over the country currently being documented across these sites, and we have sites in every type of community. We opened our first Indigenous site this year in North Dakota in partnership with organizations there. We also have sites everywhere from Gary to Spokane, as well as Atlanta, Detroit, San Diego, Chicago, LA. So pretty disparate all over, every kind of community. And that has really informed through lines and trends for us through our platform documenters.org and the volume of information that's captured in that space. But finally, we have our editorial work, which is really where a lot of our coverage lives. And our editorial team is our small but mighty newsroom that just won a Pulitzer for local reporting a couple of weeks ago. Thank you. Thank you. So we're really excited about that. And in their work, they run a civic reporting fellowship. So we have people that come to us that want to be journalists, but aren't going to go to journalism school. So we train them in the skills of journalism, help them get bylines so that they can then be hired by other locations and other publishers. And we have had a good track record of fellows going on to be reporters in newsrooms that never went to journalism school. And so we're really, really proud of the work that we do, our investigative coverage, and so much of what connects our work to community is being driven by citizen expertise and informed by community, but also even when we're not in Chicago, focusing on a multi-local approach and believing that we don't need to be City Bureau of New York. There are people in New York who know New York best. And so how do we partner with those folks and have affiliates through our Documenters Network and other programs that then further our work and deepen their work? How are we supportive to ecosystems in other places? What's our work? What's their work? And thinking critically about swim lanes. And so when we think about impact and how our work supports community, the Chicago Missing Persons Project is what recently won the Pulitzer for local reporting. It's a 7-piece series that you can read at chicagomissingpersons.com. And what makes this project so interesting is, it's a story that covers why Chicago police was mishandling missing persons cases in Chicago and how they were mishandling missing persons cases. We went through a ton of data. This was a 2-year investigation. Our lead reporter on this project was Sarah Conway, and we partnered with another newsroom called Invisible Institute, and Trina Reynolds was our partner there. And we ended up with this 7-piece series really illuminating that we had people saying that their loved one was missing, and the police would mark them as safe and at home, and 2 days later they'd be found dead. and they were never safe and at home. And you'd find that based on when they were murdered before they were marked safe and at home. And we found that in over 6 cases. We would find situations where people would say, oh, you know, I've been calling the police for 3 weeks and no one can give me an update on my case. And there's an assumption that if you are a runaway and you are Black or brown, you are a runaway. Like, you're not missing, you're not kidnapped, you're not sex trafficked, you literally just left home. And so we kept finding was that over 70% of missing persons studied in this data set were Black women and girls. And we believe that there's a larger proportion of Latino women and girls, but for a number of reasons, they're not coming forward and or not being taken seriously or reported. So when we started doing that research, we were like, hey, like, this is a real issue. And we found a lot of families with survivors saying, no one will take my case. On the South Side, if you go and you report someone missing, nearly non-responsive, and the families are not allowed to be involved in the case. On the North Side, if someone goes missing, the family is intimately involved in the case. They get updates every day, and like, it's just taken a ton more care, frankly, when white people are missing versus when Black and brown people are missing. And so as we did this reporting, the data proved that unequivocally. And so part of this was, how do you treat sources with care? Responsible coverage isn't just what you put out, it's also how you engage with the people who are being the sources, respecting their boundaries, respecting their lived experience, and treating them with care as you're also amplifying their story. I think there's this boundary, it's an interesting space of, like, in journalism, you can do a ton of research, you can do a ton of investigation, you can write a piece, and also you are amplifying the lived experiences of other people, and like, who owns the story? The person who's writing the story or the person whose life informs the story? And so as we continued to think through like the reporting in that space, we also wrapped engagement around it. So we have a engagement team, a community engagement team. So we did public newsrooms around missing persons. We have great relationships with local schools. We have great relationships with local aldermen. And so it wasn't just, okay, we're going to put out this coverage. We also did guides on how to keep yourself safe, what to do if someone goes missing, what to do to protect yourself, what are your rights? And so all of those guides came out with the 7-piece series. And then our engagement team and the reporters would partner on in-person experiences to give this information and meet people where they were so that they could actually use the information versus like solely reporting on what's happening to them. What do we do so that this doesn't continue to happen? This story came out in November. By February, we were being alerted that the City of Chicago's Inspector General was going to prioritize overhauling how the Chicago Police Department looks for missing persons. And so this is a huge, huge deal for us. We're actually speaking at a public safety hearing in a couple of months to literally just cement that this is a working group that needs to happen at the city level and reinforce the Inspector General work. But we're hoping that we do see an overhaul in how missing persons cases are investigated in Chicago. The Illinois Justice Task Force also put out a report investing in this as well through the Illinois Police Department. So that was quick, y'all. That was only 6 months ago we put the story out, and we're already seeing at the state level and at the city level that there's going to be real potential policy and process change for how missing people are looked for. But what really was impactful, the policy is important, the process is important. It's the look on a survivor's face when they see that someone listened to their story, treated with them care, amplified it, and something happened. And like care was core to that the entire time. It's the look that someone cared about your missing sister. I've been to a number of these events with our team in Chicago, and we have heard from a number of survivors and family members in real time, and they've been given the space to talk about what happened. And the just level of gratitude to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, to be affirmed, like that's responsible coverage. And so City Bureau, we're always trying something. We're always trying something, whether it's a new way to cover something, a new program, a new project, a new way to engage residents. We're always looking for a new way to be as connected as possible. But that is our work, really thinking critically about how we can amplify, how we can equip, and how the work that we do lends to self-determination, liberation, and justice.
Hearing you really feels that although you're based in Chicago, you have a national impact. And the last story, which won the Pulitzer Prize, it's an example of how this collaboration can lead to impactful journalism and change policies.
Yeah, collaboration with residents and collaboration with other newsrooms. We didn't do this on our own. We don't have to do things on our own. And that's the future of news.
Martin, I would like you to give us a brief outline of your work in the Center for Public Deliberation, and tell us a few words on how you enhance local democracy through this work.
Yeah, and I'll actually start. Our local League of Women Voters chapter, League of Women Voters of Delaware County, working with Max, working with some state resources, have kind of started a little pilot program, have an observer corps that's doing kind of great work. Yeah, my name is Martin Karkson. I'm a communication studies professor at Colorado State University. So I'm going to tell a little bit about my research that led to me founding the Center for Public Deliberation, which I run at CSU. And then that leads kind of towards the end of the story to the focus of this summit, which is media and democracy. So I'll explicitly make the connections to journalism at the end, but I think a lot of y'all, especially journalists, will see inherently the connections as we kind of go through. My initial academic training going back 25 years ago was in the subfield of argumentation. So basically I was trained on how do you evaluate arguments? How do you make distinctions between strong arguments and weak arguments? And that's stuff like logic and fallacies and credibility. But I've also really always looked at the kind of power of stories, the power of emotions, and probably most of my work has focused on the power of values. Like how do we talk about values and how values can easily be used to divide us, and how values reframed in more productive ways can kind of work to kind of bring us together in some important ways. My basic belief, which I think probably all of us agree with, is democracy, particularly a diverse democracy, is hard. It requires high quality conversations. It requires us to talk across difference. And unfortunately, we're just not wired that way. A lot of my work is informed, particularly about the last 10 years, in social psychology and brain science and how we're wired. And the unfortunate reality is that we're much more wired for outrage and anger than we are for collaboration and deliberation. Right? So the easiest way to kind of explain what I try to do in my work is I try to design processes that avoid triggering the worst of human nature and hopefully can tap into the best of human nature. And the best of human nature for me is we're actually really good creative problem solvers when put in a situation to tap into that. But we much more prefer kind of the simple stories and kind of good versus evil. We love our heroes and our victims and our villains. And once we decide who's playing what character, we see the world through that lens. And heroes do heroic things and villains do horrible things and victims get victimized. So a lot of my work is how do we kind of build off that and kind of change and elevate our conversations in important ways. So about 18 years ago, I started the Center for Public Deliberation. It serves as an impartial resource, primarily to the Northern Colorado community, to help us have the conversations we need to have for democracy to work and for us to take on our shared problems. So in my classes, every semester, I teach a class that trains students as facilitators. And then we design and we run and report on innovative events in the community. It's actually progressed now about the last 8 years. We now charge, so we get hired by the city, by the county, by school districts, by community organizations to design and run these meetings. We've run over 500 meetings in the last 18 years. And again, it's all kind of based on bringing people together. So 100 people will show up to a meeting instead of 100 people listening to a panel of experts or 100 people walking up to that microphone one at a time and talking past each other. We can put those 100 people into 15 different tables and have my students at every table, trained generally in deliberation and conflict management, trained specifically on that topic to help spark a much better conversation. And again, not trigger the worst of human nature, actually kind of tap into the best of human nature. So from that experience of 18 years of running meetings and working with cities and municipalities kind of across the country and building this kind of capacity, I've really kind of seen two big problems, and we've already been talking about these. The first is kind of the polarization, and the second is Claire Wardle has kind of framed this as information disorder, which I like that term now. So the polarization, I have this odd kind of these two strong beliefs about polarization that I know in some ways don't fit together. First is I truly believe polarization is our number one issue. Because if we're not able to figure that out, because polarization triggers the worst of human nature, it undermines our ability to be able to take on any kind of issue and have any kind of conversation that we need to have. So if we don't take on polarization first, right, the good news is that we do take on polarization, it's going to have positive impacts on all kinds of issues, right? But my second belief is that our polarization is greatly exaggerated and often kind of falsely manufactured. There's a lot of people that benefit from the polarization, right? I explain my work as trying to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and tap into the best. There's a lot of people, and they get a lot more money than I do, doing the exact opposite, that understand the social psychology and are kind of feeding us these simple narratives, because that's what wins elections, that what brings eyeballs, and that what increases their salary. So how do we kind of work against that? With information disorder, for me, I see this as a combination of kind of information overload and the misinformation, disinformation, malinformation that we've heard about a lot. The basic reality, and I think the next panel is on AI, which has even kind of exploded this even more. Our ability to create information and share information has just exponentially kind of exploded. Our ability to make sense of that information, our ability to turn data into knowledge, into insight, and hopefully into to wisdom has not kept up whatsoever. And that, unfortunately, goes back to the first problem. It makes it easy to kind of polarize people. So from dealing with these two problems for 18 years, the biggest insight I have, particularly for local communities, is they need capacity. They need bridging organizations. They need mediating institutions. We need conveners. We need skilled facilitators. We need leaders and organizations that are dedicated to helping people have the conversations they need to have, that are focused on elevating the conversation, not just trying to win the argument. The more the merrier. So I work a lot with public libraries, with League of Women Voters, with community foundations. How do we tap into more of these civic organizations? How do we reinvigorate kind of old bridging organizations and create new ones? And you're starting to see now how I'm starting to connect with journalism kind of in this role in important ways. All right. So that does kind of bring us to journalism about but fall of 2002, so almost 3 years ago, I helped launch a new project called the Northern Colorado Deliberative Journalism Project. So that's a collaboration between the Center for Public Deliberation, our journalism department at CSU, and then local newsrooms, including the Fort Collins Coloradan, which is a Gannett paper, KUNC, which is one of our radio stations, the League of Women Voters is part of it, the public library is a part of it, the honors, the political science department. So this collaboration all kind of focused on how do we kind of experiment and innovate and figure out how to infuse our local journalism with more of these deliberative concepts, the things that we've learned from running 500 meetings. Now, completely recognize journalism has always had kind of a deliberative kind of connection to it, right? Journalism and democracy has always overlapped, but we're really focused on building that part of expanding the toolkit, of infusing local journalism with insights from conflict management, insights from argumentation, insights from social psychology and brain science, and how do they fill that need? And an important point here is, I'm not a journalist, right? I'm coming to journalism because I'm focused on how do we help communities? What do communities need to function well? And I'm finding journalism as something that can kind of fill that critical need. At the same time, where journalism is struggling, right? The financial model has, so I've written kind of an article about this dual crisis of both local journalism and local democracy, and how might there be some really interesting synergy when we bring those kind of two worlds together. So that work kind of locally in Northern Colorado has now expanded. Colorado is a hotbed for journalism and innovation. So I connect with organizations called Colorado Media Project, the Colorado News Collaborative or CoLab, the Colorado Press Association, and Rocky Mountain Public Media. Just starting a project called Above the Noise, which is working with a cohort of over 40 newsrooms across the state to help them kind of build the capacity with this, for them to kind of reimagine kind of the local civic square, and how do we kind of give them the resources to kind of play this role, right? So I'll end kind of with this notion that I truly believe local journalism is going to have to primarily switch to kind of this public good model. I don't think it's going to survive as a market kind of model and the way things work. So I believe kind of playing more of this deliberative role, playing this role as convener, as facilitator, as an honest broker of information, which is a huge good that the public needs, will really help facilitate this shift. And as communities kind of realize we need organizations that help bring us together, and journalism can really fill that need in some important ways.
taking part in discussions regarding the collaboration between media and the communities, there is always a point where that really troubles me. Where is the line between reporting on community issues and becoming a participant in the issue? And especially how, as a journalist, how do journalists maintain objectivity while engaging with the community in deeply issues? And what happens when they're part of this community? How can they maintain their objectivity?
I'll start with this. Frankly, I think this is the question we're all grappling with, and we've all been debating this backstage today and for the last 2 days. I don't actually believe journalism can be objective. And I don't think that, I went to Chapel Hill for journalism school, very old school journalism. Objectivity was pummeled into us. I never bought it. We all have life experience that we bring to the table, right? I think that we have to be transparent about what we bring to the table and thoughtful and seek out other perspectives in our reporting. And I don't think that I think that was a Marty Barron article that called out that we don't expect we expect our judges to be objective and fair and to apply the law fairly, but we don't expect them to not be human, and we don't expect them to not have their own lived experiences and their own opinions. And I think we can try to apply that same sort of thinking to journalists too. I don't think journalists can be fully objective. I think we can be fair and we can seek out other perspectives. And I think it's also important for us to be part of our communities and to care about the people and the issues that we're covering and to take those things into consideration. I also think that we sometimes have a narrow definition of journalism. I think there is a place for advocacy journalism in the world. I think that there is a place for journalism that leans left and journalism that leans right. I think where we are lacking right now as a community is journalism that attempts to provide some balanced perspective. There's a lot of, to Martine's point about polarization, there's a lot more support out there for journalism that leans one direction or the other. There's a lot more money in journalism that leans way left or way right. The middle is not sexy. The middle does not get clicks. The middle does not sell well. That's harder to do, which would bring us to the sustainability issue. Just as a case in point, our organization is largely right now philanthropically funded, and I had a phone call yesterday with a funder who has been a long-time funder and very pointedly asked me what Spotlight Delaware, we covered Delaware, and we are a news organization attempting to provide fair and balanced community information. What was Spotlight Delaware going to do to advocate for the Palestinians? And where was our public statement on Gaza? And they weren't sure that they could give us funding if we were not going to take a very public position on Gaza. And that's a really tough place to be. What I ended up doing was kind of holding the line and saying, that's not what our organization does. But we may very well lose that grant because we are not trying to take an advocacy position, which puts us in a more challenging place sustainability-wise, right? I have to find the funders and the supporters who believe in the middle and who believe in discourse, who believe that it's important to have conversation, nuanced conversation. So, yeah, it's tough. This is something that we talk about in our newsroom every day. When we choose the stories that we cover, part of David's job is to help us say, hey, does that word choice make us sound too liberal? Does that word choice or that phrasing make us sound too conservative? How do we build trust among our readership and among our audience by presenting information in fair ways without veering into advocacy and still acknowledging that we're human beings with our own opinions and experiences?
I mean, yeah, I think you said something important. We are part of these
Just
communities. Like many important one of our biggest community engaged projects was around 911 calls in New York City schools. So I have kids in New York City schools. You know, half of my colleagues have kids in New York City schools. We'd done a long-running investigative project on youth and adolescent mental health in New York State and New York City. And some of the conversations that started to come out of that reporting were around what happens when young kids are in extreme psychiatric crisis in their schools. And what we learned from talking to advocates, social workers, teachers, kids, collaborator news organizations that specialize in education like Chalkbeat was that over and over again, when kids as young as 5, 6, 7 years old are in extreme mental health crisis, teachers and administrators have recourse to calling 911. And those kids end up in handcuffs in the back of a police cruiser instead of in the care of a mental health worker. That's not supposed to happen. It happens hundreds of times a year. You won't be surprised that it happens most in lower income neighborhoods, communities of color. It happens to Black boys most of all. And there's very little aggregate data on this issue. So we did some very fancy data journalism to combine Department of Education data, police data, to look at what resources are available in every school, what is the ratio of guidance counselors and social workers to students. We convened some community conversations around this issue. We created service journalism to point people at resources that were available to them. Did we do that because we thought, you know, here's a thing that's happening and we're going to cover it? And did we do it in that way because we thought it would burnish our investigative reporting chops? No, we did it in that way because we live in this city. We have kids in these schools. Our neighbors have kids in these schools. But what journalism, the combination of journalism tools and thinking, and some of the approaches that Martine outlined and Morgan outlined enable us to do is combine the power of journalistic fact-finding and new approaches to collaboration with our communities and public conversation to produce outcomes, journalistic outcomes that are grounded in the facts, but that are, of course, motivated by a desire to see the policy conversation move. And we hand it off at that point, right? And then we cover the policy conversation. But we want it to move. And so starting out from that perspective that we want our communities to be more equitable, we want to convene people around a common world of facts so that the policy conversation can move sensibly. We have an amazingly rich set of resources to do that if we are able to combine some of these toolkits and not remain very limited by Chapel Hill, you know,
which has progressed,
which has progressed enormously since. But we all know what battle they had very recently, actually, about those very standards at UNC Chapel Hill. So if we're willing to step out of those, but still ground ourselves in what our position in the civic conversation is, I think we can answer that question and turn it into a really strong positive, less than a threat.
I feel really compelled to interrogate the words truth and fact, but I know we only have so much time. I think it's really, really important to think about the fact that a grounding thing that comes to mind for me all the time and just a history of organizing is that it takes 13 touch points, contact with information, relationships, etc., to move someone to a different position. So you're walking down the street, you hear something on the radio, you hear something blasting out of someone's car, you see something on TV, you see the news. The amount of times that we repeat something, regardless of whether it's left, right, or middle, is that repetition and consistency, not advocacy? Are we not organizing? I think it's really interesting to me that there's these missing pieces around just like media as a machine, media as an ecosystem that's constantly like depending on what you listen to, who you surround yourself with, what relationships you have, and how you gather information, continues to put newsrooms in a space of advocacy, whether they would call themselves that or not, because you're contributing to the repetition and the consistency of the message, whatever that message is. And so I'm not sure that there's going to be true and absolute objectivity, because humans are fallible and you can't legislate behavioral psychology. You can't legislate bias. You can't legislate lived experience, relationship, or trust. And if you want to have trusted bonds and trusted relationship in community where people even want the information you're giving at all, can you be wholly neutral because you're not actually responding to an information need? By way of having to respond in relationship to an information need, you are choosing a side, even if that side is people. Even if that side is citizens versus institutions or systems or wealthy people or this or that, you are choosing. And that does come with very specific leans on issues. And so even if you survey 100 people that are totally different types of stakeholders in an ecosystem impacting an issue, the bias and the objectivity comes in at the editorial decision. It's the editorial strategy. And people don't actually want that, is a part of what comes up for me. Is Tim will remember this, but there was a lot of talk a long time ago, and I don't know if people still do these, but the National Issues Forums was doing a lot of guides, getting people to consensus, where you would give people a topic and give them 3 options and 10 actions within those options, and there you had to weigh the trade-offs and get people to come to consensus on the topic. People would get bothered by that because it's really hard to legislate human behavior and what you're bringing to the conversation. And so being too objective felt disingenuous to people, because what they were looking for was someone to say, your issue matters. This issue matters in the way that it impacts you. And everyone's bringing that to the table. So I think there's a level of benefit to objectivity when it comes to editorial independence and how much impact money has on the things that you do. There's a benefit in objectivity when someone is trying to use media as a lever for propaganda. But when it becomes about relationship, reach, audience, as a means of getting trusted information to people that they can use to benefit their quality of life, which is our end goal, you do have to pick the side of citizens and the information that they need and ensuring that that's what you're reporting on. And so sometimes that may be more conservative, sometimes it may be more liberal. I don't think we have to live in this dichotomy of polarization, but so much of it is media saying we're polarized, so we're more polarized because we keep telling people we're polarized. And so I think being really critical about how you build impact ecosystems that inform your work help to lean into some of that objectivity. It's like how diversity can mean 1,000 different things. I think there's a lot of ways that you can be objective, and then amplify a variety of perspectives within that objectivity while still getting to an outcome that enriches lives and enhances lives.
Kind of a danger zone. This is something I've thought and done a lot of work on, and I don't want to get into professor mode because I normally talk an hour at a time. But when I introduced the Center for Public Deliberation, I said something like it serves as an impartial resource for Northern Colorado, and I chose the word impartial. Journalists kind of tend to use objective. I work a lot with public libraries; they tend to use neutral. I work a lot with city managers and public administration; they've always been seen as apolitical. So we have all these kind of fields that some kind of call to their ethic is to not be partisan in some ways. And from my work on social psychology and brain science, our communities need that. Right? We need people that are focused on bringing us together in kind of more productive ways. But I also recognize, how the heck, does impartiality or objectivity work in a hyper-partisan kind of environment? So I actually wrote an article for National Civic Review a couple years ago about that, of defending kind of impartiality. I use the concept of principled impartiality, which is kind of purposely an oxymoron, right? But part of that, and we heard that here, is I'm going to be impartial on the issue I'm running, right? For for whatever issue I'm running for the city or so forth. But I'm actually partisan to democracy, small d democracy, which brings in some important values, right? What voices are heard and issues of power. When we train our facilitators, right, we train them if someone with power is shutting someone else down, like, no, they're going to intervene to kind of open up space. They're going to do some work. So I have this triangle. The top is impartiality. I have to be seen as impartial for me to do my work. People have to trust me. They have to believe I don't have a dog in the fight, right? But I have a commitment to democracy. I also have a commitment to good information, right? If one side has really good information and the other side has BS talking points, I don't want to be neutral there either, right? Again, my work in argumentation is to try to make distinctions between strong arguments and weak arguments. That's not easy, right? But that's part of the work that I have to do. We need good information and we need to kind of engage those tensions. The problem is those three commitments, impartiality, being biased towards good information, and biased towards democracy, don't fit together very well. There's some tough tensions. So my work is this constant process of trying to find the right balance and making sure none of those three dominate too much, right? So I do see sometimes, I think some journalists or some, people that are impartial overemphasize neutrality, right? In a way that, can fall into a both sidesism or a false equivalency, and that's kind of dangerous, right? So how do we kind of think through that a little differently? The other quick thing I'll say also is, I know obviously from the social psychology and brain science, you can't be purely impartial, but I see my impartiality, that's my professional role, right? And it's also, for me, very pragmatic. There's certain issues that when I go in, as I look at the evidence, if I consider the arguments, I consider the values on different sides, I personally feel, this side has a much better argument than the other. But part of my job is creating a process that comes out naturally, right? So I truly believe that if we have really good conversations, the side that has better information and better arguments is going to win. So I can be purely focused on being impartial, with the knowledge that, hopefully pragmatically in the long term, that's going to be the best way for us to kind of move forward on some of these issues.
I think that's exactly right. That it's really about, as journalists, we have to apply our objectivity or our balance or impartiality, whatever it is. That is our professional role. We can never completely remove our humanity from that and our own lived experiences. It's our job, though. Of course, I have my own political leanings and opinions and lived experiences that affect myself and how I think. But when Jake and I are looking at a story together, or when we're talking about how we're going to cover the upcoming election, it's my job to facilitate the community having access to lots of good quality information that they can consider, that they can participate effectively and fully. If I remove my professional hat and apply my personal beliefs and interests to that exclusively, that's no longer, that veers into advocacy journalism. And I think that's sort of a differentiator we have to apply.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You have your own opinion, but for what I say to myself is always stay on the facts. If you stay on the facts, then you are impartial. No,
the challenge is, what's his facts, right? Some journalists will say to them, well, facts are facts. Facts aren't always just facts, right? We thought we had facts about the vaccine. A lot of us who really believed and pushed that what was said about the vaccine initially was 100% fact, right? There were people on both extremes who had very strong opinions about those things and claimed these are the facts, this is the science. But facts evolve, science evolves, information evolves, and we learn things, and we have to be able to then say, we thought this was a fact, and now that information has changed.
Yep. Probably we have to dig deeper in the rabbit holes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Martin, you mentioned the issue of trust. There is a global discussion about the loss of trust in journalism, the loss of trust in journalists themselves, and we have this new phenomenon of news avoidance. Do you believe, I want to start with you as a professor, do you believe that this cooperation, this partnership between journalists, local media, and the communities are a way to regain, for journalism and journalists to regain their trust on the public?
Yeah, I do. I mean, and we certainly do see polls. I think Pew Research just released something not too long ago about local news. There is a lot more trust in local news, right? And a lot of the anti-media is often kind of seen kind of mainstream media, kind of the national thing. So you have that, but that still could certainly be strengthened a lot more, right? So one of the things that we do, we have this monthly meeting that we do at the public library on different topics, kind of engaging. But one of the things we always do is kind of a meet your local journalist, right? Because we want these people to realize, like, in your local community, your journalists, they live in your community. They're real, they're there in a real, and that kind of increases that trust. And I certainly kind of believe doing the work that we're working on with this kind of deliberative journalism, it should help with that as well, right? Because you're kind of seeing their goal, they're clearly focused on helping elevate the conversation and help people engage these issues, which gives them a different model to think about the role of the journalist.
I mean, we're all, the three of us are involved in young institutions, right? And we are still building our capital of trust as institutions in the places where we operate. And I think that's a long and complex process. And part of it is related to the discussion we just had about whether you can test our facts. Part of it is related to how we show up. Something that we are trying to do at the city is to ensure that we pair our pretty hard-edged accountability reporting with service reporting for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of the reasons is related to trust, and that is that when we do service reporting, you can really test us. So to take a simple example, if we tell you you can enter your address into a tool that we've built, and it'll tell you where you need to go vote and who your candidates are, you will see if that is accurate or not. If we tell you these are the tools you can use if your landlord won't turn the heat on to an adequate level in the winter, and you go and use those tools, firstly maybe with your landlord, then maybe with the city, and you get a result, then you can pretty maybe trust the next bit of reporting we do that may be more uncomfortable. And, I don't think there's a simple product fix or a simple strategy fix to rebuilding trust. I think these are approaches we can take, but we are actually trying to build new institutions or to rebuild existing institutions and to plug them into a deliberative civic framework and into a community framework where there is a kind of mesh of institutions and a resilient information environment. And that's not a kind of solve. It's a multi-year, multi-decade, really delicate social process that we form part of. And taking it on openly and discussing how we do it as we are here, I think is one of the really rich possibilities that we have right now. Beyond just like, can we do cooler data journalism, or how much should we charge for subscriptions? And it does feed sustainability as well. We see our readers who are prepared to contribute to us tell us over and over again that they do so because they can see the relationship between quality information and change and improvement in their conditions.
Yeah, I think to the point of trust, I always say that, like, we have public education, we have all of these public systems, and then we have nonprofits that are like, okay, this system doesn't do a thing, so now we need to do youth development, now we need to do food pantries, now we need to do all these things. News isn't there yet. We have nonprofit news because it's a different type of business model. But like, when there's this larger thing around people don't trust news. News is like not the thing people currently feel like they need this huge solve for. Like, there's not tons of nonprofits in every community that are just news literacy. There's not tons of nonprofits in all of these places trying to solve for broken news, as much as it is more nonprofit newsrooms popping up, being local news and trying different approaches. And so the models may look different, but news and media are still wholly intact as a system in a lot of ways that other systems are not. And everyone's trying to solve for fixes for things that they just won't deliver, can't deliver, don't deliver. I think there's the future. I mean, just to plant like a firm stake in it, the future of news is trust. Like, period. If we're going to sustain this industry and we're going to sustain this system, people have to trust the information we put out, full stop. They have to feel like the information we're putting out speaks to their values, speaks to their information needs. And there are also a lot of truth to the fact that you can't build trust if you don't actually know what information people need. And we think we know what information people need, and we don't always, and we don't often. And so, like, how are we listening to community in like a thoughtful way, but also bringing in and support? Because sometimes we don't even know the appropriate questions to ask to get to the root of the types of information people need. It's easy to pull together a session and say to people, hey, what do you care about? Tell me the topics, tell me the things. That doesn't get to the heart of the type of information people need, the type of information people need to have quality of life, the type of information people need to do something about a thing. Like, there's a real urgent need for information needs mapping. We do a lot of work around like what is an opportunity that's available to you, what local news systems are available to you, what topics are covered. There's not always as much listening work around style, around language, around naming and framing, and around the things that make the approach to people being able to hear the information you're even giving solid and sound. So as we think about what trust looks like, it's got to look like starting with information needs, and then really being responsive and structurally embedded in that relationship. It's why I said, like, objectivity and impartiality, to a degree, we choose the side of the public. We choose the side of the needs that the public has. We choose the side of being responsive to that. And like, that is a side because that doesn't always mean monolithic and congruent interests with other systems and institutions. So I think ultimately trusted bonds and trusted relationships are what's going to create sustainability and resiliency. And so to your point, I do think City Bureau is a good case study of this. You do have to create other roles for newsrooms. What does it mean to be a convener? What does it mean to create experiences? What does it mean to build impact ecosystems? What does it mean to be in collaboration with other newsrooms? We do that, and we do it really well. And people are picking up on that and also doing it. It's an emergent model that 5 years ago, if you had asked someone about citizen journalism and a lot of the things City Bureau was doing, they'd have told you, I don't think that's going to work. Now we have documenters demand in over 100 cities. Like, it does work. Part of the importance of the Documenters program and the Documenters network is that information and news are being documented by everyday citizens and then being turned into coverage that turns into impact. And so you can trust your neighbor, you trust your family member, you trust your colleague at work. Those are the people doing the documentation. So like, there are new roles for how people even show up in news ecosystems to broaden civic participation, advance democracy, but also make news more trusted because I know where it comes from. And it's not someone trying to sell me something or convince me of something. It's literally just my neighbor who cares as much about information at the high level as I do.
You talked about sustainability and viability. What is the role that communities play in promoting this sustainability and viability of a local media?
So this is obviously the super hard thing. The super hard thing. The public good frame, I think, is absolutely the one that all of us are grounding our work in. And how around the world have we addressed the market failure to deliver public goods? I mean, there are places where public broadcasting and other policy interventions have provided the support for that. And, you know, they are governed to varying degrees of effectiveness and allowed varying degrees of independence. There is a really burgeoning conversation about what kinds of policy interventions are needed right now to rebuild local news in this country. Should there be tax credits, for example, a very popular way of just talking about subsidies in a way that's politically palatable in the US, is using tax credits. Now, there's a community element to that, right? Do communities support public policies that will result in a healthy news environment? We are pretty darn terrible at advocating for well-designed public policy supports for the work that we do and the role we play in delivering public goods. That's starting to change. There's a great organization called Rebuild Local News that leads a lot of this work and that has just won a tax credit in Illinois, payroll tax credit, yay, Illinois, of $15,000 for each journalist currently on the payroll, $25,000 for the addition of new journalists. We have a less well-designed process underway in New York City right now. So I think, firstly, I don't want to forget, especially in a room that has a bunch of political scientists in it, a discussion about public policy intervention and the role that we all should be playing in discussing with our communities the need for public policy supports. On the other end of the spectrum, and with large resources, philanthropy is particularly in a US context, plays a huge role. And philanthropies are to varying degrees engaged with and invested in community outcomes. And certainly some of the impetus behind the founding of the city was philanthropists who looked around and said, I've been investing in housing and homelessness programs for 40 years, and I've never seen coverage so bad and so limited on these issues that I'm investing in. And there is no traction because there is no coverage. And so we need to invest in local news. And so the level of philanthropic support that's available is massively underscale relative to the size of the problem. And we need to see much more of a response on that side. It's starting to happen, and there are philanthropies that, the whole reason that we're here, right, is that there are philanthropies that get it. And that are starting to mobilize support behind local news. And there's a national initiative called Press Forward, which aims to catalyze local philanthropy behind news of this kind. Then there is the question of reader support. And at the city, for example, we get about 12 or 13% of our revenues from reader contributions. And that's people that are giving $10 a month, $5 a month, sometimes as much as $85 or $100 a month. To support our work on a voluntary basis. That's incredibly powerful for us. It also has some risks because the people who give us money mainly live in Park Slope and on the Upper West Side. And there is a danger that we trim our coverage to suit their preferences. And those are not underserved neighborhoods. They're highly politically engaged neighborhoods. But if we shape all of our coverage to ensure that we get bigger membership contributions, there's a significant chance, and I think this is a problem that a lot of public radio stations face, there's a significant chance that we'll neglect whole swathes of our cities or our counties. So we need to design a pretty all of the above strategy that involves public policy, philanthropy, reader support, and some earned revenue from advertising and corporate sponsorship. Businesses are part of communities too. So trying to capture a share of local advertising that can maybe be enough to pay for one journalist or two or three, but not expecting it to support the whole enterprise is what we need to do. But it's really, really hard. It's really, really fragile. And we are kind of coming from a standing start right now. And places are starting to build reserves, are starting to accelerate their fundraising momentum, but we have a massively long way to go.
I think it's important to acknowledge that we need diverse funding streams to support our organizations, because as journalists, we can't afford to be too dependent on any single source. And this is not new. This is the same as it was in the heydays, right? If the News Journal were overly dependent on advertising revenue from ShopRite, they couldn't afford to be critical of ShopRite, right? Because they would potentially lose that advertising, and If they depended on it too much, it would put them at too much risk. We right now have a significant significant grant from the Longwood Foundation, which in Delaware, some of you know, is part of the DuPont family legacy. We still need to be able to cover the DuPont family. We need to be able to cover, if something happened, we would need to be able to cover the Longwood Foundation without fear of going under if we lost that funding. It's the same kind of thing. So we need to be strong enough and have diverse enough revenue streams so that if we cover somebody so much that we piss them off and they yank their funding, we can survive for another day. And that's exactly the same as it has been for decades in the news business. I do agree that we're a little bit allergic in the United States, I think, to the idea of public money being part of that revenue mix, but I think we're starting to move from that. So I think that is becoming more and more of a possibility, and that there are ways to do that and build healthy firewalls. I think that we also need to be cautious when we're thinking about philanthropic support, because before I started this work, I spent the previous 12 years with the Delaware Community Foundation. So on the funder side, spending time with funders, philanthropists are fickle. We really like that shiny new project. And it doesn't matter if it's a new newsroom or a new homeless shelter or a new puppy, whatever it is, we're excited about funding that new thing. But funders don't want to do sustained funding. For not very many of them. I don't mean to paint too broad of a brush, but most funders, when we go into them, the first thing they'll say is, before we make a grant, what's your sustainability plan? This is a 3-year grant. You're not coming back to me for year 4, right? You're gonna have your own plan by then. Right now, I just say, yes, that's right. We will come up with a plan. But yeah, so philanthropy is not necessarily a long-term permanent answer, and it's certainly not, there's not enough philanthropy out there to cover all of the communities that need and deserve coverage. So even Press Forward with its $1 billion, I think they did the math and it figured out they could do something like $167 per county in the United States, which, it certainly doesn't clear anybody's check or pay their health insurance. So we have work to do on this, and I think it's going to continue to be the revenue model is going to continue to evolve.
I may be the outlier, but I'm not necessarily. I'm a believer that there are a lot of market solutions for the future of news, but I think a large part of that is because other sectors have figured out funding vertical integration for their sectors, but journalism hasn't. We fund the coverage, we don't fund the other things. So take, for example, the medical field. Has anyone been to a hospital lately? Around every hospital is medical housing. There's so many other offshoot businesses for just medical stuff. News owns none of that. We don't own billboards. We don't own the print shops. We don't own housing for journalists, but we keep saying that we want more women and diverse people to be in journalism, but they can't afford it based on journalist salary, but we don't own any housing. A lot of other areas, whether it's real estate, whether it's medicine, whether there are artist lofts, there are not for journalists. All of the other things, owning the distribution, owning all of these other pieces, we don't own. And so I think there is a lot of value to the types of products that are going to be created, can be created, that are enabling to continue to move the work forward, to advance reach, to create sustainability in the market. We just haven't tapped that potential yet. But I do think that there's a variety of products and a variety of assets and a variety of businesses that are all going to be critical to our ability to do news at all, that we just haven't figured out owning yet and delivering on yet as a means of vertical integration and efficiencies in the way that we do our work. So I think that we aren't going to have a choice but to do that in the next 10 years. There is a lot to be said about public funding. I'm not necessarily a believer that it's going to come in the way that people think it's going to come over other priorities. I don't think it is. And so I'm not banking on whether or not public funding is going to come. we are going to be receiving public funding. We took on ARPA dollars for Cook County, but it wasn't for journalism. It was for broadband and digital equity, because you need to have digital equity in order for people to have access to the information you're putting out there in the first place. And so I think it's really like this networked approach of what are all of the things, and really thinking a lot about that. I don't think, no matter how November goes, if someone has to choose about other major issues and whether or not to fund journalism at large, they're not going to choose journalism at more than like a $10 million pace. And so we just really need to think a lot about, if $1 billion nationwide from Press Forward is not going to be enough, $10 million a state for newsrooms at a $250,000 cap per newsroom is not going to be enough. So like, we are going to have to participate in the market, and not just around ad revenue. We just need time to get creative about what is that going to be.
I agree with you, Morgan. I think part of it is we need to break some of our old mindsets, because I think as journalists, we were trained in journalism school. There is no business class. You take AP style, you take, you learn to write in the Wall Street, all this stuff. You never learn about the business of it, and you are told that you're not allowed to think about the stuff on the other side of the wall. And we need to break those silos down and start thinking creatively. And I think that's what all of us are trying to do. Morgan's working on some different verticals. We're working on some different marketing solutions to help support create revenue streams for our work, our independent journalism. I think this is just what we have to do, is we have to shake off some of those old school fears and that over marriage, this idealism of full objectivity, and that you should be able to do it without having to get anywhere near dirty money. That, because it's a business. Even a nonprofit is a tax status. It's not a business model. And we have to find a way to make sure our folks get fed and well cared for and have the capacity to serve the community too.
Quite frankly, the most sustainable nonprofits I know are the ones that are vertically integrated. A good example of this is in Chicago, there's a Safe Haven. A Safe Haven serves veterans. They do multifamily housing for veterans. They also have grants from the state to do veteran services, wraparound services for mental health and housing, food, jobs, workforce development, all the things. Then they also have sub-businesses that they run around hiring veterans for catering businesses. They have government contracts with the city to have the veterans that are living in the housing also be the people doing the planters in the middle of the streets. Like, we have to do more of that, because those are the ones who are 60 years old and have not had less than a $20 million a year budget for quite a long time and aren't worried about deficits, aren't worrying about political climates and whether that's going to take their money from them during the different recessions. Like, being recession proof is going to be a really big deal. Preparing for all of these things is going to be a really big deal. And it's not going to come if we don't get in the market.
So it was a 90-minute session. I wish we had more, 90 minutes more. It was really exciting. And I want to thank you all very much for being here with us. And thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, we're about to start the final session of the summit. Please take your seats. Thank you.
So, hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this final session of the Media and Democracy Summit, especially a Friday morning, just before the Street Festival and the first weekend of the summer. So, I must say, probably scheduling this last session on generative AI feels quite strategic, doesn't it? Who knows? So, welcome to AI Everywhere, a keynote series of human-generated talks. Not 100%, because I asked ChatGPT to proofread my text in English. You do also, okay. So if things go wrong somehow, the same will be on me. If things go good, very good, now that you know I asked it to proofread my text, you don't know how much of it is like real me or fake me. And that's part of the problem. Okay, I am Kelly Kiki, a data journalist and project manager with iMEdD, and I am happy to introduce this session at the Media and Democracy Summit. Today, we live in an era where artificial intelligence is revolutionizing nearly every aspect of our lives. I remember moderating a panel discussion on AI just a few years ago, provocatively beginning the conversation by asking whether AI truly exists or if it's merely a buzzword. Nowadays, with platforms and chatbots making AI accessible to everyone for any reason, I wouldn't ask the same question. Instead, I could probably ask who already feels overwhelmed. Of course, celebrating, but also pondering the intersection of AI and humanity is normal, expected, and necessary. We have questions, but we don't have all the answers, at least not yet. We do know for sure that AI is a powerful tool, reshaping how we gather, analyze, and disseminate information. As journalists, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where AI is not just a tool, but a transformative source that can potentially shape the future of reporting and storytelling. Generative AI can create texts, images, visuals. For us in journalism, this means unlocking new avenues for storytelling and audience engagement. AI can assist in writing reports, making complex information more accessible, and producing real-time updates, for example, during major events. As often said, AI's ability to generate content can significantly reduce the time journalists spend on routine tasks, such as drafting or updating basic reports or transcribing interviews. AI can also be a useful editorial assistant. You can forget your editor for a while, for example. When you have AI generating headlines or providing feedback on gender balance of testimonials in a story, for example. Large language models, accessible for use through online platforms, are making what used to be specialized work in data science available to everyone. One could say that AI can take care of the mundane or the previously unfeasible, freeing us to pursue what we consider truly profound. Or probably not. I'm questioning this to underline that, with great power comes great responsibility. While AI offers incredible potential, it also poses significant ethical and practical challenges. The power to generate content at scale raises crucial questions about authenticity, accuracy, and bias. The rise of deepfakes and AI-generated misinformation presents serious challenges to public trust and democratic discourse. How do we ensure that the content produced by AI is truthful and free from biases present in the training data? How do we deal with the fact that we often do not know, we usually do not know, what the training data consists of or how it is treated? How do we handle the black box problem of algorithms and AI chatbots? Additionally, considering all these challenges, if humans need to continuously edit, fact-check, or correct AI-generated outputs before use, are these interactions truly time-saving, or can they be time-consuming as well? However, it's not only AI failures that we need to consider. We should also reflect on our great expectations. When platforms make AI a popular tool in everyone's hands, that is the most rebelling thing, in my opinion, they create high expectations. When these high expectations are not met, disappointment can lead to distrust. And distrust can lead to constant efforts to correct or prove or improve AI-generated outputs, ending up sometimes having AI in the loop instead of having human in the loop. So we're here today to discuss and go beyond those opportunities, threats, questions, and future possibilities. We have 5 distinguished speakers who will address their keynotes on various aspects of the chances and the challenges ahead. I invite you to listen, to question, and engage with our speakers during the Q&A session, which will follow. Without further delay, I would like to welcome our first speaker to the stage. A senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, he helps decision makers around the world understand and address the impact of emerging technologies. I'm talking about Mike Nelson, with more than 3 decades of experience in the field. He already introduced himself as a futurist. He's now presenting 4 scenarios for the future of technology and the media. Mike, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much for being here still. How many of you here were here yesterday for the panel I was in? Okay, so you already know sort of who I am and how I'm a futurist, and I now know I can't use the same jokes. I want to thank our moderator for doing a very concise introduction because I have a 40-year resume and it can get pretty long. I'm going to do something very unusual. I'm a technologist, but I don't like using technology on stage because it never quite works for me. But I've invented something called virtual PowerPoint. So imagine that this is my piece of chalk, and I'm going to draw things in the air to illustrate 4 scenarios for the future of the internet. I mentioned yesterday I've had 8 dream jobs. My 5th dream job was teaching at Georgetown and doing some consulting for the CSC Leading Edge Forum, which is one of the top, most visionary consulting groups talking about not only how technology will evolve, but how it will be used by corporations. And in that, I learned really how to do scenario planning and how to develop really concise, effective ways to think about the different ways the world could evolve. The course I taught was called, one of the courses I taught, by far the most popular course I taught, and the most fun class I taught was called How to Predict the Futures, parentheses S. My goal was not to tell people what was coming, and today my goal is not to tell you what's coming. It's to tell you 3 or 4 things that could be coming and how you can get ready for it. The Bible that I used for my class was from Peter Schwartz, one of the most successful futurists, scenario planners of all time. He personally made Shell Oil $40 billion by helping them prepare for the future. So listen to me. Maybe you'll help somebody make $1 billion. The first thing you learn from Peter's book, which is entitled The Art of the Long View, it's more than 35 years old, but it's still the best manual on how to do scenarios. The first thing you do is you sit down and you think about all the different forces and factors that could shape our future. And I'm focusing today on the question of technology-enabled media. You know, what's coming because of new ways of sorting through information, new ways of generating information, new ways of building community online. So if you start making a list, it's a pretty long one. Obviously, we're going to be affected by cheaper technology. We're going to be affected by artificial intelligence. We're going to be affected by changing nature of demand. We've already seen people talking about the post-literate society and the rise of TikTok as an incredibly effective way of delivering news, not necessarily comprehensive, unbiased news, but it's providing news to tens of millions of Americans, at least for now. So when you make this long list, you then highlight the 2 that are fundamental, the 2 things that will most affect what the future is. And then you make a 2-by-2 matrix that allows you to look at the different ways that these 2 factors could influence the world. My argument today is that the 2 things we need to focus on, by far the most important factors that will define our future, are the amount of trust that consumers have in the media that they are consuming. And the other one is the amount of sharing of data, content, and information about the people who are providing the content. So if you draw, if I take my virtual PowerPoint, I'm going to draw a vertical axis up and down. Up is trust, people believing in the media more than they do today, and the other direction, people believing less. On the other axis, we have more sharing and less sharing. So we have divided the world of the future into 4 scenarios. If you know anything about McKinsey and Gartner, you know that the golden quadrant, the one that provides the most benefit to the most people, is usually the top right. Now, I'm making a values judgment. I think more sharing is better. I'm an engineer, a physicist. I like data. There's a lot of MBAs who actually think that the less sharing side is more profitable because you can hoard your data, you can build a wall around your data, you can charge monopoly rents for your data. And that's one of the problems with these scenarios. There's a lot of reasons that people are pushing one way or the other. There's no consensus on what the best is. I think most of us want to be in the upper half. We want consumers to trust more. But surprisingly, there are business models that benefit more by being in the bottom half of this four-part space. So let me quickly describe what I think could happen in each of these scenarios, and then talk about the most important part of my presentation, the barriers that are preventing us from getting to the golden quadrant, where information flows freely and people can figure out what to trust. Let me start by describing what I think is a good goal. In some ways, it's the Wikipedia model. It's a world where millions of people have contributed insights, and probably tens of millions of people have corrected, refined those insights, sometimes fixing a typo, other times providing more footnotes, building trust in that content. Most people don't understand that Wikipedia is already using artificial intelligence and some very sophisticated technology, because there are a lot of trolls out there who are trying to alter Wikipedia. And that's one of the reasons it's going to be hard to get above the line. We have nation states, we have PR agencies, we have just strange teenagers who think it's fun to deface websites. They're pushing us down. So we need the technology that artificial intelligence provides. We also need something else really important. We need provenance. We need technologies built into the system that allow us to know where a particular sentence or diagram or data set came from and whether it's been altered. Microsoft's done some great work on technologies for provenance. It's a bit like what they do with art pieces, right? When you buy a painting, you want to know that it's not stolen. You want to know that it's really the real Van Gogh. You want to see a record that goes all the way back to, ideally, the artist's studio. We need that for content. We need to know who's actually pumping that information out. Am I reading this because of some Russian troll thought I needed to see it? Me and 2 million other people? And that's another place where artificial intelligence can help us know whether somebody is distorting our information environment. Twitter has invested a little bit of money on this, Facebook a lot more, but we still haven't fixed the problem. And then the other issue is this identity question. We need a way to know who created this, if they're willing to reveal that. I mean, we want anonymity online, but for much of the media, you want to know the real source. You want to know the reputation of that person. You not only want to know their name and perhaps who they work for, but you'd like to know some of their other attributes. You want to see their LinkedIn profile. You want to know what training they have, what other publications they have, so you can know whether to trust. So that's what we need to get up to this world. But the other really important thing is we need sharing. We need the ability to take all this content without paywalls and combine it into the distilled wisdom that you're really looking for. How many people remember Nicholas Negroponte's famous articles about the daily me? This was something from the 1980s, and it was in the early days of online publications, even before the web had been commercialized. The idea was you would get your customized newspaper, ordered in the sense of what you care about, not what the editor cares about or the editor thinks you care about. But to get that kind of customized content, somehow we have to be able to tap hundreds of different sources every day. And today, the MBAs are in charge in more and more places, and they're putting up the firewalls and the paywalls, and they're making it harder for me to get the customized content I want. And so that's the difference between the right side of my scenario chart and the left side. In the left side, I might trust the content because I can go to the New York Times website and see that, yes, indeed, it's the New York Times. But I have to do a lot more work. I have to waste a lot of time logging in. I have to spend a lot of money to get all these different sources. So that's, again, two good scenarios that work for a lot of people. I would argue that more sharing gets me a more useful, customized content. And I'd also argue that if I have 5 sources that AI can check and validate and compare, I will be more likely to trust it than if I only have enough money to buy one source of content behind paywalls. If you haven't already seen it, I urge you to get a copy of The Atlantic or pay for a subscription. This is Anne Applebaum's new article called The New Propaganda. This is what's worrying me most, and my friends at Carnegie include several researchers working on the Partnership for Countering Influence Operations, PCIO. They've built a network of the best people around the world trying to stop the pollution of our brains by Russian trolls, Chinese trolls, Iranian bloggers pumping disinformation into our brains. They're not looking to filter out the world of bad information. They're not delusional enough to believe that there's any technology that can do that. Their focus is getting our brains more protected so that we actually can spot the difference and so that we have tools that we can use to see where information came from, who's reposting this, and why is it in my feed. Another, one of the colleagues just did a great report on countering disinformation effectively. This is an ironical title. It's by John Bateman and Dean Jackson. It's ironical because the answer, when you actually look at the data, is that there are 11 ways to counter disinformation, and not one of them is really effective or economical. Some combination can get us a long way, but we have a lot more work to do. And a lot of it depends on these questions of identity and provenance. We need new technologies. And as a technologist, I want to help us not only develop those technologies, but make them cost effective. The other thing that I think we can look forward to in the future is not artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence. Rather than having AI doing the thinking for us, if we design these tools well, they're augmenting our intelligence, and more importantly, they're augmenting the intelligence of our network of collaborators, and that network can be not just a few dozen people, but literally millions of people, like it is with Wikipedia. And that's where we have to be thinking. We have to be thinking of an open global mind of interconnected people and interconnected tools, providing the augmented intelligence needed to find the good stuff, to push us above the untrusted, trusted line. And the only way I believe we really get to where we need to get is if we have this open sharing. So that's my bottom line. The question, though, is what's keeping us from the right side of this diagram? Why isn't there more sharing? Well, first of all, I've blamed the MBAs already. Buckminster Fuller, one of the most famous visionaries of all time, was famous for saying, engineers see scarcity and innovate to create abundance. MBAs and politicians see scarcity and turn it into monopoly and profit. I'm with the engineers. One of the ways the people who want silos and monopolies do what they do is by overusing and abusing copyright. And if you look at when copyright was started in 1710 with the Statute of Anne, it was a very different thing. Today it's being used to really restrict the competition and dramatically restrict collaboration, preventing people from building on the good content that's out there already, whether it's music, imagery, content, books. But the other thing that's become very clear is that there's a new excuse for keeping data locked up in silos, and that is national security. We just saw that with TikTok. The American people, tens of millions of American people were using TikTok every day. They want the flow of information. The US Senate and the US House of Representatives decided that there was an existential threat posed by TikTok videos, and they're closing down the sharing of information. It's not just the US. In India, they had a border skirmish in the high Himalaya. They have a buffer zone where you can't have guns or artillery, so the Indian soldiers started dying because the Chinese soldiers were throwing rocks at them and starting landslides. A few dozen people died, unfortunately. The Indian government closed down 200 Chinese apps. And again, this national security is restricting this sharing of information. It's even more clear in the area of artificial intelligence, which could lead to better collaboration and sharing and better, more trusted sources of information. We actually have members of Congress fighting against open source software for AI. Open source software, sharing of the software, is the way we've developed the entire web, whether it was the original web, much of the content. The network itself is based on open source software. But you have members of Congress saying, "Oh, you wouldn't open source the Manhattan Project, would you?" Comparing AI to nuclear technology. That's not a stupid analogy. That is a self-destructive, self-defeating analogy. We need to stop this using national security as an excuse to stop sharing. But it's there, and technologists like me, innovators, not just in the AI field, but in Wikipedia, in the media, we all have to kind of reorient and get away from this idea that data is like oil. Data is the new oil. It was on the cover of The Economist 5 years ago, so it must be true. No, it's insane. We don't burn our data and then be done with it. Data is the new water. You use it once, you use it again, you use it again. You mix it, you make it better. Unfortunately, with water, we also have a whole bunch of it in the deep ocean and locked up in the Antarctic ice sheets where we can't use it very well. But that's how we need to think about it. Water is something that flows across borders. And that's where we can, with these new analogies, we will get to a better world where we have more trusted information and more sharing. I hope we have time to go a little deeper into this. I do intend to write this up at some point, so I would welcome your comments and criticisms. The best way to do that is to use Twitter. I was one of the very first people on there. My Twitter handle is @Mike Nelson. I was the first Mike Nelson, and I'm very proud of that. But you can post there, you can send me direct messages, and again, I hope I've stimulated some thought and maybe said one or two things that are controversial and useful.
Thank you for your talk, and thank you for finishing kind of on time. So earlier we referred to accessibility and the potential of bringing AI to everyone's hands. The question is, does this truly apply to everyone? And how can we create the conditions for AI to be a problem solver rather than an obstacle for small newsrooms around the world? Ana Paula Valaco, the community manager of Journalism AI, an initiative of the journalism think tank Polis at the London School of Economics, proudly emphasizes this point and is passionate about ensuring that small newsrooms are not left behind. Let's hear from her. Ana Paula, welcome to the stage.
Hello. Well, let's see if this works, because I'm the first one using a clicker. I mean, 3 days, but still. Can I try? Yeah, definitely a huge win. Right. Okay, so we've talked and we discussed a lot about all the problems that right now media is facing around the world. I mean, it's not like the best time to be a journalist in many senses. I mean, audiences, they avoid us, like actively avoiding us. The news business, oof, we don't get money. I mean, very complicated indeed. What else? Well, and then what happens? AI comes and basically it can replace us. That's absolutely terrifying, right? And especially taking into account the important role that these kind of newsrooms, the small newsrooms, those that perhaps they don't get, the millions of page views or whatever, but they are doing a very, very relevant part in representing these democracies that are increasingly complex, increasingly diverse, but at the same time, they get polarized. They seem to be more homogeneous at how they are covered. So when we started at Journalism AI 5 years ago, we did some research trying to understand what was going on with AI in newsrooms and thinking how powerful this tool could be to empower them, to allow them to do more, better, and for more people. So basically, like 5 years ago, we had like this very, very clear message. And this is a quote from Charlie. He's our director and founding director of Polis and Journalism AI, saying that, yes, if we value journalism as a social good, as something that we all need for the public interest, then journalism needed to update and do it fast, because this wave, this third wave, we had the internet, we have social media, now it's AI. And when I talk with journalists, a lot of them, they just say it's not a wave, it's a tsunami. I mean, basically, I don't know what to do. Well, if they don't get ready, then it will be very difficult for us and for our societies. So we started working on that. And for example, something we did was establishing a fellowship that was the collab, in which we invited newsrooms from all over the world to take part, to start iterating, innovating, experimenting, and having a safe space, a safe environment to test new things and see what worked and what didn't. And then we realized that collaboration was key. Yes. Also, we needed to give resources, and in our situation, the resources that we can provide and that we have tried to also empower, besides giving the opportunity for all these news organizations to connect, is also to learn. We established an academy that basically works specifically with the small newsrooms, saying because, thinking that these technologies are really powerful and could really, really enhance their productivity, and with newsrooms that we know, they struggle a lot to get resources, they don't have time, they don't have very huge teams or whatever. So basically, assisting them into how to surf this wave and use AI responsibly in an ethical manner. And then we started, like, of course, trying to democratize this knowledge to all. What we have seen is that when you go, when you support these newsrooms, some incredible things can happen. And I'm just going to bring some examples from the Global South, because if you were here yesterday, you know already that, yes, I'm from the Global South. I mean, that's how they call us. And we really face a lot of challenges. So basically, anything that these news organizations can do to get better or to improve their work is crucial. The first example is Chequeado. Chequeado, I mean, it's a very dear case to me because I was part of this process. I was part of the organization back in 2016 when we started working on deciding what parts of the fact-checking process we could automate and to make it better for our fact-checkers at the newsrooms and our news editors to work in a better way, in a more efficient way. And we decided that, for example, something that we could do was relying on the artificial intelligence at that time to go and screen and read all the news that we, I mean, as humans, it was very hard to do or very time consuming. And say, okay, let's train this AI and let's make this AI help us to identify those fact-checkable statements that we then will use as our main input to do our work. This was incredibly important for our newsroom, and we started doing we started using it for live fact checkings. We use it for live transcriptions, and then incorporating previous fact checks into the process, so we didn't have to fact check the same statement twice or 3 times. It's something that could happen in a newsroom and always have to run behind the news. And what happens with Chequeado is a very interesting case because it's a newsroom in the Global South. I mean, our work was the first done in Spanish at that time that would also collaborate with organizations, for example, in the US, in the UK, and South Africa. Well, Africa Czech kind of works on different countries in Africa. And basically, how these technologies, once we adopted them and we make these adaptations, then they could easily be used by other organizations. Today, for example, a lot of fact checkers in Latin America are also using this technology. But how was this created? It was created also because Chequeado had the support from external actors that also believed that Chequeado could do this, and then they could allocate specific resources to this. And this is a privilege that not many newsrooms have. However, there are other news organizations that are now getting resources and are now doing great stuff. For example, Cuestión Pública. Cuestión Pública is an investigative newsroom in Colombia. And investigative journalism is very complicated, especially imagine Colombia. I mean, you are dealing with a lot of different actors, and sometimes you don't have people that want to do that kind of job. Sometimes, and I mean, these stories take a lot of time, and these small newsrooms, they don't have some time. They the ability to say, okay, yes, don't worry, work 3 weeks, 2 months in this story. I will do the rest, because basically, when you work at a small newsroom of this kind, we all do everything. So basically, what happens with this project, Odin is a project that, 1 year ago when we talked with Claudia, the leader of Cuestión Pública, she told us that, yes, she was thinking about how they could implement AI, but at the same time, again, resources were scarce, time was difficult to manage and everything. They were part of the challenge, the AI in Journalism challenge, with OSF, the Open Society Foundations, in which we participated also delivering our adaptation of the Academy. And now they have Odin, and it's a tool that allows these reporters to sort, into their vast amount of information that they have gathered, like along the years in their investigative work, and include it and incorporate easily into their stories. So basically, it's a great way to make their work more relevant and more efficient. Then we have, for example, Rappler. Yesterday, we discussed a lot about what Maria Reza and her team are doing back in the Philippines. There, where our democracy is not present, and they have been struggling to show and to defend the truth in the middle of a lot of misinformation and disinformation campaigns, attacking them and everything. They were also part of the Open Society Academy last year, and there they built a tool to provide summaries and everything. I think that also this, for example, this initiative, that is the communities that they have created, they allow us to have great conversations with their audiences and making sure that, for example, hate speech or fake news don't get distributed between their communities. How to develop these safe spaces to have deep, quality conversations with your audiences is also key when you are trying to do so much for the democracy you live in. And then, for example, we have Daily Maverick. Daily Maverick is a newsroom based in South Africa. And what they have worked on is to create these special features how their newsrooms, the news they write, their articles, they get special summaries. They are edited always by editors of the team. And this has increased a lot the readership and the potential they have to retain their audience and help them travel across their content and also engage in more different ways with what they are producing. So basically this is an example of an initiative that we have done for a couple of years. Now, for example, this year, we did the first edition of the Academy in Spanish. Last year, for example, we also focused on that our African cohort, our European and Asian cohorts were comprised with more journalists from the most underdeveloped or the least developed countries, so we can provide better opportunities for them. And now we are launching it in Arabic. We are partnering with Arish, that is the Reporters of Investigative Journalism in Arab, to also deliver this kind of information, this kind of resources that are really, really difficult to get in other languages than English. And that's a huge problem. And we discussed yesterday how important it is that these technologies are all basically produced in English, and they represent the culture. They are kind of conservative, of course, but how these different nuances in our cultures are not represented in a lot of these developments unless they build it themselves. And again, it's very expensive. So basically, we have talked a lot about our problems. And my take on AI, this is something we can discuss because I'm really open to that, is that basically the most relevant problems that the news industry have, they are not particularly related to the AI, exclusively related to the AI, but they can be either solved or accelerated with AI, by AI. And we have a role in ensuring that we can solve them in some way. Do I have an answer? No, but still, I think that, for example, supporting these organizations is key, is super important. And I love it that we are here and we are saying, yes, news matter, good journalism matter, and we have to help them go in that way. So that's it for now. I'm going to join my partners here in the panel later, but basically the idea is to let you know that, yes, a lot of things are being done, perhaps not as many as we'd like or as we need, but if we keep on working or walking this path, then there are some really, really important reasons to be hopeful about the future of news. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, very much. So if talking about AI today is synonymous with discussing challenges, then many of these challenges stem from the notion that AI, especially generative AI, is uncontrollable and ever evolving. This sounds similar to the earlier days of the internet and the web, which is no longer a free land. When self-regulation seems unfeasible, regulation might be considered unavoidable. But how do humans regulate such a seemingly unreachable matter? Louise Riondel, co-secretary to the Council of Europe's Committee on Artificial Intelligence, will explain why regulation is needed. She will lay out the current regulatory landscape in Europe and beyond, including the Council of Europe's Framework Convention on AI and Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law. And she will discuss the main challenges of regulating AI. Unfortunately, Louise could not join us here in Wilmington as initially planned, but with the help of, guess what, technology, she will participate remotely. So let's try this. Louise, I will ask you the most asked question in recent years. Can you hear us? But we cannot. So let's do it again. Unmute Louise. And Louise, can you hear us? But we cannot. So that's our life. No lessons learned after 2020.
What about now?
Okay. The floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. Finally, technology has not failed us. I'm really sorry I couldn't be here in person today with you. And we've talked about benefits and risks and how they play a role in distrust in AI. And I think indeed it is due to the fact that the expectations regarding the benefits were maybe too high, and that the magnitude of the risks, well, it has sometimes been overinflated to unrealistic doomsday scenario. And so in order to gain back this trust, which is fundamental, it's really important not only to demystify AI, which is to say what it technically can or cannot do, and the media plays a crucial role in this, but there's also a need for effective regulation, and that is what it responsibly should or shouldn't do. Now, I know that the word regulation sometimes has unhappy connotations of restriction and stifling, but in reality, it's simply a set of agreed upon rules to ensure the good functioning of something. And so let me draw a parallel here, which may particularly speak to you in the audience today. So many of you are professors or journalists or soon to be journalists. And in Western democracy, the media plays a pivotal role, which we've heard about today, and which has repeatedly been confirmed by the European Court of Human Rights, which is that it's the purveyor of information, it creates fora for public debate, and it acts as a public watchdog. And so as such, and to a certain degree, you have power over individuals in the formation of their thought, in the shaping of their beliefs, and over which information they have or don't have access to. And as Kelly said earlier, with power comes responsibility, but also duties. And in your profession, one might be tempted to take shortcuts to be the first one to break a story, for example. So some of your colleagues may publish an illegally obtained photo or run a one-sided interview or intentionally write a biased piece, leaving out crucial information. And others, such as yourselves, I assume, follow strict rules to ensure that your work is balanced, fair, and that it generally adheres to the highest level of ethical standards through, for example, fact-checking, source protection, and the cross-checking of information. And so the aim of regulation is to ensure a level playing field for all actors with minimum standards that all must abide by to mitigate the risk of harm. And so in the last few years, as the use of AI in our everyday lives has exploded, so did seemingly the proliferation of regulation of this technology. So what does it look like now? At EU level, the EU AI Act was adopted last week. And so it establishes a common regulatory and legal framework for AI in the European Union. And it basically says that AI system must be analyzed and then classified according to the risk they pose to users. And then according to that level of risks, there will be more or less regulation up to a total ban. And so that applies to the 27 member states of the EU, but also like the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, which you know about, the GDPR. The Act can also apply extraterritorially to providers from outside the EU if they have users within the EU. Then at international level, you have the OECD recommendation on artificial intelligence and the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. But guess what? Those two are legally non-binding. And so that brings me to the Council of Europe Framework Convention on AI and Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law. So what sets the Council of Europe apart from those two institutions that I mentioned is that its role is to protect and promote human rights, but also democracy and the rule of law. And the organization has always been at the forefront of regulation of technology in order to protect these three guiding values. So for example, as early as 1981, we adopted the Convention for the Protection of Individuals with regards to automatic processing of personal data, which is known as Convention 108, 1981. And then in 2001, we adopted the Cybercrime Convention. Now, in 2019, we started working on AI. And what we did is we brought together within the Committee on AI, which is known as the CAI, like-minded democratic states wanting to make a pledge to use AI responsibly and opposing its misuse. And those states are the 46 member states of the Council of Europe, but also its observer states, which are Canada, Japan, Mexico, the Holy See, and of course the United States of America, as well as the European Union and a significant number of non-member states, which are Australia, Argentina, Costa Rica, Israel, Peru, and Uruguay. So truly global. And their task was to draft the first international legally binding treaty in this field and also make it future-proof, but also conducive to technological progress and innovation. And so 2 weeks ago, on the 17th of May, 2024, the Framework Convention was adopted. It aims to ensure that the activities within the life cycle of AI are fully consistent with human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And it formulates fundamental principles and rules with which AI systems must comply. And those principles are human dignity and individual autonomy, equality and non-discrimination, respect for privacy and personal data protection, transparency and oversight, accountability and responsibility, reliability, and finally, safe innovation. And so the convention also sets requirements for states in terms of remedies and procedural rights and safeguards, and creates an obligation to create a risk and impact management framework. And I can talk about this a little later in the Q&A if you want. But most importantly, it does not only address human rights, but also democracy and the rule of law, and it is open to all states that share the same value. And so the Framework Convention is the first step in creating a comprehensive regulatory landscape for AI, which will be complemented by additional sectoral instruments aiming to guide the member states and others in how to create the conditions for a high level of protection of human rights. And of note, and I think of particular interest to you, are also the recently adopted guidelines on the responsible implementation of AI systems in journalism. Now, we talked about the challenges of regulating AI, and I can think of three. The first one, as Kelly said, is that the technology is constantly evolving. In the middle of the negotiations of the treaty came ChatGPT, and this is everything everyone was talking about. And so how did we manage this? Well, we made sure that the text is technology neutral and flexible enough to be future-proof and not obsolete in 6 months, which is a real risk when you have a technology that keeps bringing new products. A second challenge is that when we started working on the text, and very much still true to this day, there's no AI-specific regulation at national level, but there's pre-existing rules in specific sectors, and so we needed to reconcile that. And the solution was that the Framework Convention gives leeways to states to do that as long as the principles are respected. They're at the core of the text principles. And finally, while there's a strong interest in having an international common approach, bringing together a wide range of like-minded states and finding a compromise that's acceptable to all can be challenging because different states have different sensitivities. Here again, the answer was that the treaty integrates all existing universal human rights standards and it makes them effective in the AI context. And so to put it in a nutshell, I believe that regulation is key for the public to regain trust in AI and for the technology to also develop safely and without prejudice to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So now we have the Framework Convention, which is a good legal basis and which is balanced and effective. And again, it's open to all states sharing the values of the Council of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. We did it. So our next speaker will delve into the realm of regulatory actions while shedding light on how digital infrastructure molds political power. With a keen eye on the complicated interplay between media, technology, and policy, he will navigate us through the landscape of platformization and highlight the role of citizen inclusion in shaping our collective digital future. Please join me in welcoming Taylor Owen, the Beaverbrook Chair in Media Ethics and Communications, the founding director of the Center for Media, Technology and Democracy, and Associate Professor in the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. I'm sorry for that.
Thanks so much. So I have the privilege of leading 3 organizations: the center that was just mentioned at McGill that does media and technology policy, a media ecosystem observatory that tries to better understand the health and character of our media ecosystem, the information that flows through it, and what effect that has on society, and a nonprofit called Paradigms that produces media and podcasts and democratic interventions in the form of deliberative democracy processes in this very discussion. And I have to say, up until pretty recently, none of these organizations did very much on AI. And part of the reason was I was very reluctant to dive into the next technology before we fixed some of the problems of the past one, and before we really understood the impact of the things we were living through now. But I think that's changed for a few reasons, which we're all very aware of. I mean, we have now consumer products, AI products, that have sort of at least shown some value to people and have a promise of future value, and that's created a wide public discourse about these technologies. We have hundreds of billions of dollars flooding into the development of AI, and when that happens, something happens. Like, you can't put hundreds of billions of dollars into developing a technology and it not have an impact. And we have some of the biggest companies in human history betting their futures on this technology. So I think we have to pay attention now to what is going on in a real way. And so that's why I just wanted to maybe offer a few observations on situating the AI conversation and moment that we're in now in a broader conversation about the evolution of our infrastructure and of our media and technology. So the first point I'd make quickly is that the nature of our digital infrastructure has always had a profound effect on the nature of power. And at each phase of the evolution of our digital technologies, power has changed. The first internet, the Web 1.0, empowered individuals and nodes who couldn't speak or didn't have access to the public sphere to speak. This had a real effect on the power of certain actors. Our social media infrastructure connected those nodes together and allowed for collective action. So all of a sudden, not just individuals, but groups became more powerful, groups that were excluded from traditional power structures. The platform internet, or Web 3.0, reconcentrated a lot of that power back into the hands of a few. The companies that filter our experience online, that decide what is seen, who is heard, they have reconcentrated economic and political power in them. And I think the question we need to be asking about this next phase of digital infrastructure of AI is how will that shift power balances again? Because it is certain to. The second point I would make is that we used to be able to treat discussions about the media and discussion about technology as different things, and we did that for many, many decades. But that is no longer possible. I think they both are self-reinforcing to one another. They exist in the same framework, and we need to think of them as one and the same. And they are both heavily influenced by policy. Public policy matters in a deep way to the nature of both our media ecosystems and our technology infrastructure. Even if we do nothing, that is a policy choice that shapes the future of both of those systems. And we need to be really clear-eyed from a policy perspective of how we're engaging with AI, with the companies, with the people building it, with the technologies and how they're used, because it will shape the future of what AI is or isn't. The third point is that, like, looking at these advances over the last year or two, I mean, it's almost certainly the case that certain AI components of AI will be transformative, and other uses and elements and technologies within the AI sort of bucket are all hype. But it is almost impossible to know which are which right now. And that is a really difficult position to be in. I recently spoke to Douglas Rushkoff, who's a media and technology critic who's been watching how cultures change in response to new technologies versus the hype ones versus the unhyped ones for 30 years. And I asked him that, like, how do you know when you look at a system as it emerges, right? Because he's seen the advent of all these new technologies. Which ones are hype and which ones aren't? Which ones to care about and pay attention to and take seriously and which ones not to? And he said that all he does is look for the ones that are stimulating activity and involving people that he would want to be a part of, that he thinks are interesting and dynamic and generative, not the ones that are taking and diminishing. And I think that's what we need to do with AI. We need to look at where the places and people are that are doing things that we think are generative to the things we care about. Okay, a couple more points. The fourth is that looking at journalism, and I know there's been a lot of conversation about journalism here, I think we need to be really clear-eyed about how journalism organizations and publishers enter into relationships with AI. We've been here before. When social media, when audience and money and content moved into social media, the platform companies at the time, Meta, Google, approached publishers and offered them a bargain. Come to us, we will give you tools, we will give you revenue, and we will give you access to new audiences. And I would say all three of those turned out to be false bargains. The audiences turned out to be fleeting because they were subject to algorithmic change. You never knew where you were going to find them or how you were going to find them. The money dried up. The deals that were between platforms and publishers went away. The revenue model just didn't work, as we all know, for the industry of journalism. And the tools changed on a daily basis without any notice. If that's the precedent of these relationships, I think we need to think clearly about entering into them with a new generation of tech companies like we're seeing now. And it seems pretty clear that publishers have two choices. At a high level, I mean, surely they can experiment with these tools, as they should be, and there'll be lots of use cases that are beneficial to journalism. But at a structural level, they need to decide, are they going to enter into deals that essentially indemnify AI companies from the scraping of their previous data? Or are they going to object and, in the case of the New York Times, sue? And I think there's just two paths there. And it's going to be very interesting to see how different publishers do this, particularly publishers that don't have the clout for the really big deals. We're not all News Corp. We're not all going to get $250 million from OpenAI. The fifth thing is their observation here, and this goes back to the policy side of this that we just heard about too, is that There's a very convenient implication to the two main policy arguments about the future of AI at the moment. Either it poses this existential risk that threatens the future of humanity, or it's a panacea for every social, economic, and political ill that we face as a society. Both of those obfuscate the real regulatory and policy things we can do now, and I think should be doing now. And they conveniently do this. They make it seem like the policy challenge is far in the future. It engages with a technology and a set of potential harms and benefits that are yet to be known, and ignores the things we probably should be already doing. And I would say that we need to think very clearly about copyright policy and how it applies, or whether it applies to this new world. We need to think about data privacy laws and actually having them in countries that don't have any, like here. We need to be looking to competition policy to think about whether we want 4 to 5 companies controlling what they claim is the key technological infrastructure of the next decade, next century, and whether we should be looking for smaller actors. And we need to get the distribution of harmful content right. We know how to do this. We have examples in other countries of online harms regulation that can diminish the harm and the risk of harmful content, whether it's created by AI or not. So these are the things we need to be doing now, not big speculative, in my view, big speculative projects about an unforeseen and unknowable future. And the final thing, and I'll just leave it on this, is that we seem to be in a place where we are okay with a very small number of people and companies deciding not just how AI could be built, will be built, is being built, but also whether it should be. And I'm not sure that's how we should allow a new layer of infrastructure to evolve. I think we as citizens need to be a part of this conversation. And I'll leave you with one example of these trade-offs that I don't think these small number of people and companies should be making, but rather we should. So we know that we have an almost certain climate catastrophe on our hands. Like, that is a near certainty. We also know that the potential of AI, of this technology, is simply that. It's potential. We don't know how and whether it's going to be good for society. And yet, we are barreling into this world where we risk that climate future for the energy and natural resources that we're putting into building the AI system, that we don't know how that's going to play out. And I think that kind of trade-off between these big societal risks and decisions needs to involve people, and that really needs to involve new forms of deliberative democracy. So we've been doing a lot of experimentation on citizens' assemblies and how to bring citizens in meaningful ways to designing technologies and regulations that serve their interests. And I think we really need to see a whole host of experiments around the world in that on AI. So I'll leave it at that and look forward to our conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Taylor. So as we draw near the conclusion of our keynote series, although we started from trying to predict the future, we're gonna embark on a reality check. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Jonathan Soma, Knight Chair of Data Journalism at Columbia University, where he directs both the Data Journalism Master of Science and the Summer Intensive Lead Program. With passion and practicality, he will guide us through an exploration of AI, what it currently truly is and what it isn't, setting realistic expectations and dispelling unfounded fears. Probably. Welcome to the stage.
Hello. All right, we have to practice audience participation. Are we excited about AI? The answer is yes. Yes. All right, wonderful. Perfect. So right now in the world of AI comes down to us from on high. It is an amazing godlike power that has somehow come to us and blessed us with terrible fears or wonderful hopes. And what does it all mean? What is going on when we're dealing with AI? And it turns out that AI means a lot of things. And when we talk about AI, we can't just say AI, because let's say we go to book a flight. When we book a flight, there are probably a half dozen different touch points where we're actually interacting with AI systems without even knowing it. So we might visit the page of maybe Skyscanner or Google Flights, and we might see an advertisement, which is targeted to us by AI. We might start to type in our target location of where we're trying to fly to, and our keyboard might autocomplete Athens, Athena. That is also populated by AI. When we hit that submit button and it says, here's the flight that we're looking for, all of the pricing details, all of the layover details, all of that is also computed by AI. Google Flights is very convenient because it says, maybe if you kick the flight a couple weeks in the future, it might be a little bit cheaper, or prices are going to go up, or prices are going to go down. Again, calculated by AI. And then when it turns out that you bought the wrong flight and you need to get a refund, you might talk to a chatbot, which is, again, powered by AI. But it's only that last one that we're excited about right now. It's only that generative AI that we are hyped about. The fact that we can have a conversation with a machine. This AI says it is not looking to the past. This is not just about calculations of numbers and finance and things like that. This is about the future. This is about creativity. This is about putting things into the world that have never existed before. For example, I can have ChatGPT write a sonnet about my mean, fat, dumb cat Mulberry. I could have it write a custom curriculum for a child, customized just for the things that they want to do or the things they need to know. I could even have AI sing me a lullaby in order to put me to sleep when I am up late at night, terrified about what the future might bring in terms of artificial intelligence. Are we doomed? I don't know. Just sing me a song. I will be okay. AI, or so we've been told, is magic. But it turns out that maybe this isn't true. Maybe it's not true. Maybe that really boring thing that Google does where it says flight prices are going to go up or flight prices are going to go down is remarkably similar to getting a poem about my cat Mulberry. You would never be told this by an AI company. They would say, this is new, this is fantastic, this is incredible. But it's actually based on the same thing, and that is patterns. It is based on patterns. It is based on looking at what has happened before and projecting it into the future. And sometimes, traditionally, that's been done with numbers. It's been done with pricing. It's been done with anything involving math. But now it has moved forward to text and art and creativity. So we're going to do an example. If I say I'm blank and I ask you to complete this sentence for me, you will say, I have no idea what you're looking for. Sleepy, hungry, soma. It's a mystery. It could be anything. But I say, okay, let's try this again. I haven't eaten since yesterday. I was hoping for starving. Usually when I do this, usually the first time everyone says starving even though it's hungry, but that's fine. That's fine, close enough. Same general vibe. We're going to try this again and maybe we'll do a better job this time. Maybe I'll do a better job this time. Dearest friend, I dare say I have not partaken of food in ages. I'm positively famished. Yes, famished. Unbelievable how all of you got that. This is incredible. You all are geniuses. This is the same thing that ChatGPT is doing. If you go to the OpenAI website, there is something called the playground, and you can kind of see into what is happening with all of these AI tools. And in the same way that what you did was you looked at all of the text, the words that came before, and then you predicted the next word, that's the exact same thing that ChatGPT is doing. But instead of just predicting one word, it predicts one word, and then another word, and another word, and those words become sentences, becomes paragraphs, become book-length novels, whatever you need them to be. But all it's doing is one by one predicting word after word after word. And you can actually look inside and you can say, if I say I'm positively, there is a 93% chance that the next thing that's going to come out of there is famished. And then after that sentence finishes, I'm positively famished, what comes next? Maybe it's would, maybe it's might, both in the mid 20%, because who knows what comes after that sentence. Now, when you have a conversation with ChatGPT, it's not always the same. It's not always going to say it's famished. And that's due to this thing called temperature. Temperature allows the AI tool to go further down in that probability list. It doesn't always predict the most likely thing. If you up temperature and up temperature and up temperature, suddenly I'm no longer famished. I can be ravenous instead. We saw famished, 93% chance, but there is that 4% chance that I could be ravenous instead. So if anyone said ravenous, you would have been okay. You would have been okay. Not as popular as famished, but you would have been okay. If we up that temperature even more, sometimes the AI starts to make sense and sometimes it just spouts nonsense. And this is very, very important because suddenly what we're seeing from these tools doesn't look like intelligence. It looks like nonsense that sometimes might work out. And so what you need to know is large language models, like these chatbots, do not understand facts. They do not understand concepts. All they understand is statistical probability. It is just a game where they are predicting the next word and predicting the next word and predicting the next word. And sometimes it seems to make sense. So even something like this sonnet about mulberry, it does not understand cats. It does not understand sonnets. All it knows is that it read a ton of books, it read a ton of Reddit posts, a ton of stuff on the internet. It applies a little bit of statistical magic, and then somehow, out of the other side, you get a sonnet about my dumb cat. As a result of this, when we think about all of the problems that come with chatbots, things like hallucinations, things like me having a master's degree from the University of Denver, things like you can put glue onto a pizza in order to make the cheese stick better, or you have a pixelated photo of Barack Obama and somehow he becomes a white man. These things are not true, but they might just be statistically probable. Statistical probability is all these tools are doing. So it is actually a crazy accident that anything that they do is actually seems to be based in reality. Sometimes statistical probability lines up with truth, not always. So when it does something right, we should be shocked. The default state of things is these tools getting things wrong. So for example, CNET published 71 personal finance articles and 77 personal finance articles. 41 of them had incredibly long retractions on them because they were written by AI. Air Canada had a chatbot that told someone, yes, you can get a cheaper bereavement fare. It's because you're flying for a funeral. It's going to be great. And then Air Canada said, oh, actually, that's not true at all. And someone had to sue in order to get, I believe, $280 from them. And most recently, New York City had a chatbot which told people that they could steal money from their employees and deny Section 8 tenants living in their buildings, things that were completely illegal, but it was cast as legal advice from a New York City chatbot. So all of these errors are what we should expect from these machines, not accuracy. But everyone is so excited to do it. They say, I can cut some costs. I can do things a little bit more cheaply. This is great. Sign me up. But it is a given, hallucinations, bias, low quality content. This is always what's going to happen with these tools. But it's not, doesn't mean we can never use it. Doesn't mean we can never use it. I believe there's a category of things called error resilient tasks. And error resilient tasks are ones where it's fine if things go wrong. For example, poem about mulberry. This calls mulberry a girl, her throne. Mulberry is a boy, but you know what? If I get low quality output, I can say that's fine. I'll just change the her to his, no big deal. I'm editing it. Tight feedback loops. If I ask ChatGPT to write code for me, if I run the code and I get an error, I know it was wrong, and then I fix it. And finally, if errors are expected, what I like to call intern work. Am I going to read 20,000 pieces of legislation at the state level for New York State? Probably not. I would, if I'm looking for gun control legislation, I could read them all and score them all 100% accuracy and filter out the gun control legislation. If I had an intern, they might be wrong 3% of the time, 5% of the time, 10% of the time, but it's fine. I'll have AI do it. It'll be as bad as an intern. No harm done. I'll get what I'm looking for. So I would like to say that fact-based enterprises like legal advice or journalism or construction or sometimes customer service, things that are based on truth, are immune to AI, because AI doesn't understand truth, doesn't understand concepts. It's all statistical probability. Although we've heard a lot of talk about MBAs, they try to push it into these fields that should be immune, but unfortunately are not. Earlier this week, the Washington Post has AI summaries that are available on articles, which would be terrifying, except for the fact that all of these summaries are now generated by AI, but then reviewed by editors. Why are the editors not just writing them in the first place? Don't really know. So when Elon Musk says something like, mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nuclear weapons, what is happening here is it is a hype machine. It is feeding into the hype cycle of these tools are so powerful, give me more power so that I can cope with them because I'm the only one who can do it. But in reality, what is happening, the issue is automated systems. The issue is not about the power of AI. The issue is human beings giving up power to automated systems for things like auditing for welfare fraud or analyzing resumes or dropping bombs. This are tasks that we should be relying on human beings to do. But human beings are passing it off to these AI tools or these ML tools or some sort of automated system that is far more simple and saying, not my responsibility, I'm going to let the computer handle it. And this is when we have problems. It's a result of the people, not of the AI. So next time you start to think or start to get pitched that AI is a magic tool, just think about how it doesn't have a knowledge of truth or a knowledge of knowledge or any understanding at all. It is not magic. It is just statistical probability. It is simply patterns, no magic involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you were on time. How did you do that? No. You're not going off stage. Come on. I was about to ask you if you were an AI thing and you were on time, but then you went off stage. So I realized you're a human. So please, I would like to call them all on stage, and we're gonna have our Q&A session a little bit shorter than initially planned, but we will be fine. We will be fine. So are there any questions on AI aspects discussed today with our speakers? Sure.
Thank you all. These were very insightful keynotes. I just wanted to ask about LLMs and how there's much talk about them being black boxes, having almost zero interpretability. So in that sense, they cannot be reproducible. How can we ensure that there's greater transparency in what's going on inside, like the model weights, the data sets, the logic of the system, so that they can be democratized, essentially? Thank you.
Who is taking this?
So as a person who's very deep in the technology of this, I feel like one of the virtues of journalists is journalists are constantly dealing with things that they do not understand and asking questions to, despite not understanding the inner workings of how they work, you can understand the outputs. And despite the fact that I teach technology and I teach coding and I teach all of these things, I think that the idea of interpretability, a lot of times, we could focus instead on, let's push a bunch of inputs in, see what comes out, and then we're able to find out about things like bias. We're able to find out things like hallucinations. We're able to think about how these tools are used and the goals of them, the systems they are used inside of, and think about their impact on the real world instead of focusing so much on the kind of theoretic peering inside. Now, peering inside is wonderful and delightful, and you can learn a lot about them. But I feel like by opening up even just the weights, even if not the training data, you are able to audit these systems, absolutely.
Can I add, there's a bit of risk in going too far down the transparency route on this, I think. And for a long time, we heard a lot from the regulatory side about algorithmic transparency. And I'm just not sure how useful that's going to be when we're talking about LLMs or other AI systems. I mean, I just don't think looking at the code is going to solve the problem. It's going to be things like risk assessments and looking at outcomes and looking at biases of outcome and input. I mean, that's the way we're going to get into it.
I promised I wasn't going to say anything because I talked too long before. I didn't see the time clock over here. But I will add, I'm doing a piece on AI myths and dangerous buzzwords. Algorithmic transparency is a very dangerous buzzword because it implies that you can look at the code once and know something. The fact is these whole programs are designed to rewrite themselves every hour as you feed them more data. So we do have to do exactly what you said. Look at the output, understand whether we can trust it or not.
Do we have any other question for our speakers? Yes, please.
Thank you so much to everyone. I agree with you or some of you who said that the coverage of AI technologies in media is dominated by hype and doom. I would like to ask you, what are the stories that you think journalists should be writing, reporting and writing about the impact of AI technologies in societies? What is missing? What are those stories you wish to see?
Who is asking? Who are you asking, Marina?
Whoever
wants to take it. Okay, who wants to take it?
Well, I think that there are some really, really relevant stories on this. I mean, perhaps, yes, it's not that we want algorithmic transparency, but still algorithmic watch, or like being able to report on the results and how these algorithms, again, they have biases, they are reproducing like certain conservative, I mean, in their nature, they are reproducing things, and specifically, they are produced by certain actors. And we do need more eyes on that and more diverse eyes. I mean, like, for example, there's some amazing work being done by organizations like The Markup, Rest of World, or, I mean, really cool newsrooms. And it's less than in our regions because, again, it's something that sometimes we don't understand and we don't get access to the actors that are developing these technologies, and there's a huge gap. But I would like to see more of that, and I think, for example, well, the work you're doing at Pulitzer Center, and I mean that kind of initiatives, I think they are key because they are in many ways instilling and creating a lot of the things that we are doing every day. They are inspired about these technologies that we don't know a lot of how they are built.
I feel like a lot of the good work that we are seeing comes out of investigative journalism. And oftentimes, science journalism and business journalism, you're doing a lot of repeating what you have been told, either from a paper or a report or a spokesperson. And that usually doesn't have a big impact on the world. But the issue right now is if you were repeating something that Microsoft or OpenAI or Google or one of these other organizations is telling you, either from a technical point of view or a business point of view, you are feeding into the industry in a way which is affecting politics. And so while the investigative side of things is uncovering all of this bias and uncovering, social justice issues, it is really the business, the science reporting that is just doing what they normally do, right? They just, repeat a lot of things that are said because they are not domain name or domain experts often. And it ends up having ramifications in the real world in terms of policy.
I want to know more about how they got all this data. I think journalism should be really tracking back how each of these companies has acquired the type of data they seem to be now using in these models. And I think things like that, like deep getting into the machine and the processes and incentives that have underlaid it are really important for investigative journalism to get their hands on.
Luis, I'm looking at you through our monitor here, and to be honest, I'm not sure if you really want to intervene or not, but I would probably suggest to the production team to keep her unmuted. And yeah, Luis, feel free to intervene if you wish.
Yeah, thank you. I really agree with everything that's just been said. I think on my side, one thing that I would like to see a bit more is the balance. I feel like in the general public, there's a lot of, it's either black and white, like either AI is going to destroy everything and kill us all, or it's great, it's genius, like let's do everything AI. But, for example, we had talks about whether, or we were told rather, well, why don't you ban facial recognition? It's so horrible, it's terrible. Well, yeah, in some cases it is, in the hands of a bad government that's going to use it for bad purposes. Of course, it's a very powerful, terrible tool. But then there's also other examples. For example, we know that facial recognition can be used for patients that have lost the ability to move, and they can, for example, move their face and communicate with the outside world. So, again, this is why also we've taken the stand to not ban any technology specifically, and to say, okay, look at the context of the use of the AI system. So I think one thing that really needs to change is to not have this black and white also vision of either AI is terrible or it's great and it's the best thing since sliced bread.
Thank you very much. So we would normally need to wrap up because we had a longer beginning than expected. I would ask just to take one question if there is any. Or okay. So no need for any overtime here. So I would like to thank all of our speakers today in this keynote series on AI. Those were Taylor Owen, Jonathan Soma, Mike Nelson, Ana Paula Valaco, and Luis Riondel. Thank you all very much. And you can go because I would like to call to the stage Anna Kinthia Bouzdougou, iMEdD Managing Director and SNF Dialogues Executive Director, and Timothy Safer, SNF Ithaca Director and SNF Chair of Civil Discourse at the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware. Anna Kinthia and team are wrapping up and closing this Media and Democracy Summit.
Hi, Kelly.
Hey.
How are you feeling?
We're coming from both directions.
Oh, we made it.
So should I stay or should I stay or should I go?
We made it, first of all. That was the first Media and Democracy Summit. And I would like personally, on behalf of iMEdD and SNF, to thank you, to thank Nicolas Aronis, and to thank Dimitris Bounias, who is not here with us, but he's always with us. And of course, the rest of the team, because the three of them that I just mentioned, and sorry for taking the floor, team, were really core members of whatever you watched all these days. It was the core team of the content of this summit in collaboration with the SNF Ithaca team. But for us, it was the first time. It is the first time being in Wilmington overall. So that's why I need, on behalf of iMEdD, to highlight, and sorry for the rest of the colleagues, because there are also many other colleagues here and in Athens who joined this effort for this summit. But Kelly, Nicolas, Dimitris, if you hadn't done the work with regards to the content, there wouldn't be any reason to communicate anything, to design anything, even for us to present and host anything. So that's why I wanted to thank you.
So thank you.
And maybe just to follow to Anna, thank you to the team. This was truly a first time, a conversation
around the themes of media and democracy that was made possible through this collaboration between iMEdD and SNF Ithaca at the Biden School here at the University of Delaware, and seeing this as an opportunity for us to think about local challenges, local issues that we heard about earlier today, and looking, even as we ended the conversation now this afternoon, how do we think about the future, the possibilities? Hearing in so many ways, if I can just say a couple things that really struck me. How are we being creative? How do we access information? How are we listening? How do we foster trust? Recognizing there are both challenges and real opportunities at this intersection of media in and for democracy, which is what's really bringing us, I think, our teams together. I think all of you, really grateful for all of the speakers, the panels, the sessions, the provocative questions that, to me, were really arresting. How do we think about these things, not just as journalists, not just as academics or members of communities in whatever ways we might think about that, or students, but for all of us, this is the big societal question. How do we live with one another? How do we engage? And at the heart of this is the role of a mediated world.
Yesterday we introduced the summit, the Media and Democracy Summit, but today's speakers, and many thanks to all the guest speakers who visited and are visiting actually Wilmington with us for this purpose. But all the speakers today framed and raised two very major issues on the topic of media and democracy, which are funding and AI. Because funding goes with the sustainability, and it's not only who pays, who finally has to pay, but also on what kind of media business model. Because journalism is not for free. Somebody does the work, or should do the work for all of us to be informed. This cannot be a hobby. This cannot be for free. And the answer, who should pay, does not mean that the funder should be only one. Huge amounts, but not only one source. Because as journalists, when you have only one source, you cannot double-check your information. When you have huge amounts released for newsrooms, I think that this reminds us the existing media model in the private sector. And if I remember correct, we admit that it is not so much successful. It has failed, actually. So who pays, but also on which kind of media business model, it's also crucial. And of course, AI. Exactly because we should also wonder if we are ready. I'm pretty sure that it is already late to make this question, but yes, the need here is to be safe and secure, that the AI is the tool, and we understand it and we drive it. Are we? This is also up to us. So thank you. Thank you to the speakers for today's questions, and thanks to all of you who joined this effort through this summit. Thank you.
And thank you to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making so much of this possible as we have this conversation and as we look forward. Thank you so much for being here for these last few days. And we look forward to the continued conversation that will be in that future that we keep alluding to.
Because it's not only the money. Of course, we need the money because there are plenty of incredible ideas. But as I said 4 times, somebody has to pay. On the other hand, it's also about the networking. And it's also about how you connect the dots and how you bring people together and not just release amounts of money. It's also about the network. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.